Chapter 569. However, there was no time for her to think further. The Lord Shinryu spoke for the second time. Lord Wei River, you did a good job on this matter. It is beneficial for the demon race. The rest of you should do your best. Li Yunxin smiled and bowed. It's all thanks to the Divine Lord's wise leadership. I only did a little bit of work. His attitude was not so much respectful as intimate, and he seemed to be doing it on purpose so that everyone would know that he, a small character who had been hunted by all sides and crushed by all kinds of forces, turned out to have such a big backer behind him. The Lord nodded slightly. The bright light in the sky flowed like water as she moved. Although most people did not dare to look at her, everyone knew what the Lord was doing because of the light. She looked at the evil Lord again. Evil Lord, the Wei River Lord needs your help in this matter. However, I know that you do not like to be involved in worldly affairs. Therefore it is up to you. However, your daughter can help Lord Wei River on your behalf. The evil Lord lowered her head slightly. However, when she heard this, she raised her head and looked at the bright image of Shinryu in the sky. Her face turned even paler. The words, "your little daughter," struck her heart like a clap of thunder. She immediately lowered her head again. It seemed like she was hurt by the golden light and realized that she had lost her composure. However, she looked at Li Yunxin from the corner of her eyes. The words in her eyes were, "You told her?" Li Yunxin shrugged his shoulders lightly. "I didn't expect it either." However, nothing else happened after that. Shinryu's gaze quickly moved away from the evil lord and landed on the ninth young master. This was the newly appointed Lord Tongtian of Li Yunxin. From the moment Shinryu appeared, he wanted to appear calm and composed. His hands were crossed in front of his abdomen and his head was slightly lowered. Just like a real official in the palace, he stood respectfully and obediently. But if one took a closer look, they would find that his crossed hands were clasped so tightly that the veins on the back of his hands were exposed. He could hardly contain his nervousness and was expressing it in various ways. In fact, when the Divine Emperor looked at him, due to the flow of the light, he also felt Shinryu's gaze. He immediately raised his head. But then he lowered his head and shifted his feet anxiously on the cloud in midair. After 2 breaths of time, the true dragon celestial let out a low sigh. This sigh did not seem to come from her alone. It was more like the heavens and the earth were sighing at the same time, as if the entire world was sighing for him. "Little Nine, it has been hard on you all these years." The Divine Lord said this in a gentle and kind tone, completely different from the dignified tone he used when talking to others. "Raise your head. Let me take a good look at you." Everyone had a look of surprise on their faces. In fact, they were even more surprised than when Shinryu showed up. Li Yunxin was originally a nobody. But now, this joking little demon bodyguard actually caused Shinryu to show up. Until now. The ninth young master, who was not favored by everyone and was exiled to the Wei River Dongting for thousands of years, actually received such words from Shinryu. If it was a human, if it was a mother and son in the human world, it would be fine. However, no one had ever seen such familial love between demons and monsters before. But the ninth young master was no less surprised than the others. His body stiffened as if he suspected that he heard wrong. However, he did not dare to raise his head immediately and did not know what to do. So he subconsciously looked at Li Yunxin. Li Yunxin. This Li Yunxin. At first, he was like a trembling but interesting little beast in front of him. But after the ninth young master died and his dragon body was taken away, he realized that he was not a little beast, but a poisonous snake. When he saw more of Li Yunxin's means and heard more information about Li Yunxin from his second brother, Lord Tongtian Hatred, he finally knew what kind of person he met on that rainy night. He was not a poisonous snake. He was a devil. His hatred for Li Yunxin was hard to eliminate. However, Hatred's consciousness eroded his will, making him forget and lose a lot of things when he was desperate and helpless. The death that Li Yunxin brought to him was in an instant. And the death brought by Lord Tongtian was a long and horrible process. This process finally made his hatred for his second brother overwhelm his hatred for Li Yunxin. In the end, after Li Yunxin promised to save him and guided him purposefully, it fermented into some kind of abnormal emotion. In Li Yunxin's words, this emotion of the ninth young master actually had a specific name, Stockholm Syndrome. It was more common in people who were emotionally sensitive and easily dependent on others. For example, a person was kidnapped by a kidnapper, but the kidnapper let him live. The hostage gradually became grateful to the kidnapper, and even developed some kind of attachment, good impression, and fought together with the kidnapper to save him. And now, when the ninth young master felt uneasy and lost, he subconsciously looked at Li Yunxin. He saw Li Yunxin smiling and nodding at him, and then slightly shaking his head in the direction of Shinryu. The ninth young master felt that he was saying to himself, "Don't worry. I did this for you and I said I would make it up to you. Now you can feel at ease and don't need to worry about anything." His madly beating heart calmed down a little. Then he clenched his fist and raised his head. Shinryu's face was beautiful, gentle, dignified and peaceful. He could see the majesty of a king in her, and also, the ninth young master didn't know if it was his illusion, he could see the glory of motherhood. In the night sky, maybe it was because his eyes were burned by the golden light, but water vapor slowly rose from his body. This caused his figure to become indistinct, and his face to become indistinct. Shinryu smiled again. "I know the hatred between you and Lord Weishui. He also told me about your grievances. But I put you in Weishui Dongting, not because I neglected you but because I have other important things for you to do. Now the things there have been finished and your merit is complete. All the hardships you have suffered these days, just take it as my test for you. Since you have passed this test, now you deserve the title of Lord Tongtian." The mist on the ninth young master's body became more and more violent, and his face was almost completely covered. The newly titled Lord Tongtian couldn't speak. Shinryu looked at Li Yunxin. "Lord Weishui, does the new body you made for Lord Tongtian have a name?" Li Yunxin smiled. He bowed and said, "Lord, I have heard a rumor before. It said, there is a kind of mythological beast named Ba Wei, which is also Dragon Son and Dragon King's favorite son. Because he violated the law of heaven, he was banished to the mortal world to guard the canal for 1,000 years. After that, he was released. In order to commemorate his achievements, people carved him on the bridge to suppress the river and prevent the flood. This story was made up by the common people in the mortal world, but it is widely spread. I think the story of Ba Wei is similar to the experience of the ninth young master, and it is said that his real body is very similar to the dragon body of Lord Tongtian. Therefore, I made such a body for the ninth young master. I did not report to Lord Tongtian, I should be reprimanded." He drew a dragon son without permission, but said that he was reprimanded. It was really arrogant. However, Shinryu listened to him and smiled. "Little Nine has done a good job, he should be rewarded. You are too eager to protect him, so you are not wrong. I give my permission for this. From today onwards, the real name of Lord Tongtian is Ba Wei. He is ranked second among all the Dragon Son. The whole world should know about it." Li Yunxin quickly said, "Lord Tongtian is here tonight, the whole world will know about it in the future. Lord Tongtian Ba Wei, you should thank Lord Tongtian for his gift." At this moment, the ninth young master seemed to wake up from a dream. After a while, he squeezed out a few words in a trembling voice. "Thank Lord Tongtian for his gift." Shinryu actually nodded slightly. "After this matter is settled, Lord Wei River should come to my Dragon Island. Lord Tongtian, follow him to the Dragon Island. I have missed you for so many years." The ninth young master could not say anything. He suddenly knelt on top of the cloud, and his whole body was covered by the thick cloud. Shinryu then nodded with satisfaction. "Lord Wei River. Where is Guqin?" Li Yunxin calmly bowed to Shinryu. He then looked at Emperor Li. He said in a deep voice, "Lord Tongtong." The traitor Qionyou knew that he had been exposed and had no other choice, so he used his supernatural power to escape. "After this matter is settled, I will investigate carefully along the way. I will also ask the demon kings to interrogate him. He will not be able to escape from Lord Tongtian's trap." Li Yunxin finally mentioned the demons. The demons immediately shouted, "We are willing to serve Lord Tongtian and serve Lord Wei River." At this moment they were surprisingly quick-witted. They knew that Lord Tongtian would still have to return to the Dragon Island even if he showed himself. However, Lord Wei River Li Yunxin was Shinryu's favorite. Bootlicking him was much more beneficial than bootlicking Shinryu. However, this time the bootlicking seemed to have backfired. Shinryu was silent for a while, then said in a deep voice, "From what I see, the mastermind of this matter is hatred. Guqin Lord Qionyou might have been deceived by him and did not investigate. Now that the mastermind has been executed, if Guqin Lord shows signs of repentance, I will not pursue this matter anymore. Let's not talk about him anymore." Just like the demons, the evil lord turned to look at Li Yunxin in surprise. But he realized that Li Yunxin was also surprised. If he was not faking it, it meant that he did not expect Shinryu to say such a thing. "Hatred? Where did he get the ability to confuse Qionyou?" Shinryu continued, "But you also said that Tao Wu and hatred are in cahoots with each other and want to fight against the demons. If that's the case, we need to punish them severely. From now on, I will strip Lord Tao Wu of his title. All the demons in the world can rise up and kill him. Whoever kills Tao Wu will be given the title of Lord Tao Wu and the treasures of the Crimson Cloud Palace. The evil lord sighed. She knew this day would come, but she did not expect it to be so soon. Lord Shinryu was simply impatient. Before this, Kyuko and Shinryu were able to coexist peacefully because of the balance of power. The suppression of the Celestial Gate forced Shinryu to rely on Kyuko and not act rashly. But now, Guqin Lord in hatred made a wrong move and caused Li Yunxin to lose everything. When the Celestial Gate was destroyed, the power from the outside world was gone. The true Dragon Celestial had begun to clean up the unrestrained feudal lords. Chapter 570. No wonder she looked so high-spirited, no wonder she was so close to Li Yunxin. This New Wei River Lord must have become Shinryu's #1 confidant. But the evil lord frowned again. But she felt Shinryu was a little strange. She couldn't tell what was strange. Although the 9 sons were Shinryu's, they didn't nurse and raise them like mother and son in the human world. In fact, they had never been close to the Lord since they were born. They only saw Shinryu's incarnation like today. The last time she saw Shinryu was 2,000 years ago. At that time Shinryu looked the same, but she felt something was wrong. She didn't know if it was just her imagination. After all, 2,000 years could change a lot of things. But there were 2 reasons why she dared to have such a bold idea. First, Li Yunxin was too spoiled by Shinryu. She felt it was unreal, unless Li Yunxin met with something in Mount Cloud, and it was beyond her imagination. Second, she knew about Red Lady. According to her daughter, Bai Yunxin, the dragon soul in Red Lady's body had taken over her body and merged with her previous consciousness. Hong Yu's personality also changed. Maybe this so-called Lord Shinryu was her in disguise. However, if that was the case, how did Hong Yu manage to imitate the true dragon so well? The second hypothesis didn't seem to be valid. She calmed herself down and didn't say anything, waiting to see how things would develop. When Shinryu gave such a decree, all the demons present responded in unison. What happened tonight would soon spread all over the world. Maybe there would be some great demon kings who wanted to find trouble with Lao Ai. It was hard to say whether or not he would be able to kill the dragon's son, but it was certain that he would be hard-pressed to deal with it. After saying this, Shinryu finally looked at the 2 ghost emperors. The 2 ghost emperors were once mortals. Now that he had become a ghost cultivator, he should belong to the demon race and be led by the Shinryu. But in the past they were all supreme beings. How could he obediently bow his head and listen to him now? Although he could now feel the terrifying might of Shinryu, there were still many things that made him feel mysterious and holy when he heard them. However, if the true dragon really appeared like it did today and also showed the emotions of an ordinary person, the sense of holiness would be greatly reduced. Therefore, when Shinryu's gaze swept over Emperor Li, he could still clench his teeth and straighten his chest to look her in the eye. Although he only managed to hold on for a moment, he could no longer bear the pressure and drooped his head. However, Shinryu didn't say a word to them. After carefully examining the 2 cultivators, he retracted his gaze and said, "River Lord Wei, your subject is here. After dealing with this matter, hurry to the Dragon Island. I have another important task for you." These words caused countless demons to be envious and jealous, to be able to be entrusted with important tasks by the Shinryu government. Li Yunxin smiled and said, "Yes." The Shinryu paused for a moment. Then, the light that filled the sky suddenly retracted. As if the tide had retreated, the world returned to darkness. The demons sensed this change and looked up at the sky. They saw the thick clouds were illuminated by the mysterious light, as if there was a sun hidden behind the clouds. Amidst the clouds, there were huge scales glistening with golden light, as well as a huge dragon's head that flashed through the clouds. The long tentacles and mane glided through the clouds, as if the galaxy was flowing in the sky. These demons were fortunate enough to see some of the dragon son's true forms on the battlefield, and they all knew that the true form of dragons was majestic and extraordinary. But now that she had seen the real body of the true dragon, the dragon head finally understood what shock was. It was as if the entire world was just a shallow pond for her to stay in. If her real body were to appear in the world, it would turn the world upside down. However, this glimpse quickly disappeared. After the golden light appeared in the thick clouds, Shinryu immediately disappeared. The place became quiet again. The Fiend King opened his mouth. He wanted to say something, but he couldn't say anything. This true form and aura, it wasn't something that a carp demon who had just merged with a dragon's soul could disguise. This seemed to be Shinryu. That Li Yunxin, was he really favored to such an extent? What did he do? This went on for almost a quarter of an hour. After the demons had fully digested the huge shock of Shinryu's appearance in the clouds, Li Yunxin spoke again and said the same words, "Now we are all comrades." This time no one made a fuss. The demons tried to understand the meaning of this sentence, and once again tried to recall what Li Yunxin said before. Not every one of them was willing to be recruited into this little demon protector. But now they didn't have the right to object and could only accept it like before, because this was an order from an existence that they couldn't go against, and they couldn't even think of going against it. And now, Li Yunxin in the sky was the messenger of that existence. For the first time they looked at Li Yunxin with respect and no other emotions. 2 days later. This was the official road of Yi country, and it extended all the way to the east, passing the border of Yu country. Previously, hundreds of thousands of soldiers passed through this official road, transporting wood and red soil to Tongtian Swamp, and then retreated because of the massacre by the cultivators of Xianmen. When they retreated, the demons had already started to attack Cloud Mountain, and the mortal army encountered an even more dangerous situation, leaving behind many corpses. Corpses and broken armor piled up on the roadside and no one collected them. But fortunately it was late autumn and the weather was cold and the decay was slow. But today, when Li Yunxin and the Fiend King walked on this road, these corpses were nowhere to be seen. Because last night, autumn turned to winter and it snowed for the first time. The first snow of this year in Yi country was very heavy. Snowflakes as thick as goose feathers fell from the sky, burying the trees, weeds and corpses that had not yet fallen off. Heaven and earth were covered in a vast expanse of white, as if the terrible massacre a few days ago had happened a long time ago. Now there was only emptiness and loneliness. They left a series of footprints in the snow, and finally stopped in front of a dilapidated post house by the roadside. Li Yunxin conjured a white fox fur cloak for himself. Now his handsome face was covered by the fur, and he raised his hands to salute the Fiend King. "Even if you send me off for 1,000 miles, we still have to part. Third sister, I will see you off here." The Fiend King sighed. "Escaping was only a matter of a moment. But you insisted that I accompany you all the way. It turns out that ninth brother likes to play this little trick of sending me off for 1,000 miles. Well, now you are satisfied. It's time for me to go." After saying this he looked into the distance. Dozens of steps behind Li Yunxin, Lu Gongzan, the chicken spirit, the ninth young master, and Bai Yunxin were talking about something. The Fiend King thought for a while. He was about to speak. Li Yunxin exhaled a mouthful of white mist and said, "Don't worry, third sister. Miss Bai saved my life in the past. I will not put her in danger. Besides, she is also in the profound realm. There is nothing to be afraid of." The Fiend King sighed, "I hope so." Then he looked at Li Yunxin carefully. Looking at the current Li Yunxin, his face was slightly red. His skin was even dry from the cold. It was not unusual for a mortal to look like this, including when he exhaled white mist when he spoke. But when it appeared on Long Sun, in fact they were formed from dragon essence and demonic souls. Strictly speaking, they did not have a physical body. They did not need to breathe and were not afraid of cold or heat. Now, when Li Yunxin spoke with white mist and his face was red from the cold, the Fiend King knew that he was playing. He seemed to find it fun to make himself look like a human. In the past 2 days the Fiend King found that he liked to eat fruits. To Long Sun this was something that was not necessary at all. He frowned and said, "Ninth brother, since you are so reluctant to part with your human life, why did you do this? How could he be so vicious?" Li Yunxin rubbed his hands as if he was scared. "Third sister, you mean, you destroyed the destiny of the profound sects in the world? You prevented people from cultivating easily." She looked at Li Yunxin and said, "What you did is a great contribution to the demons. But to humans, it's incomparably vicious. Because of this, you won the Divine Lord's favor. So, I don't know if it is a blessing or a curse for Xener to fall in love with you." Li Yunxin smiled and said, "After all, I am a demon now. As for the human life, everyone has their own little quirks. If a demon is not vicious, what kind of demon is he? Well, only someone as powerful as third sister can be kind." The Fiend King knew that she could not get any more information from him. So she said, "Fine. Ninth brother. Be careful. The Dragon Island might be more dangerous than Yunshan." After saying this, she waved her sleeves. A gust of demon wind carried snowflakes up to the sky. More than 100 whirlwinds appeared in the vast snowfield far away. The evil lord and the many demon kings under her command had gone far away together. Bai Yunxin also flew up to the sky when she saw this. She did not know if she should bid farewell to the Fiend King. Li Yunxin looked up to the sky for a while and walked to the post house. He sat on the wooden railing beside the post house. On the other side, ninth young master said something to the chicken spirit. The current lord of heaven reaching and Ba Xiao pretended to be angry. The chicken spirit had been with Li Yunxin for a long time and was naturally slippery. He coaxed the ninth young master like he was coaxing a child. The atmosphere between the two was quite harmonious. Lu Gongzan walked into the post house and shook off the snow on his body. He patted his head and sighed softly. It didn't snow so early last year. It is a month early this year. Previously there was a land requisition. I guess the crops in the fields were confiscated too. Look at it now, they are all buried in the ground. As he said this, he sat down beside Li Yunxin. He took out a small silver wine pot from his bosom and shook it. But there was no sound from the flask. It seemed to be frozen. He then drew something on the wall of the flask. After 2 breaths, a faint white mist rose from the mouth of the flask, and the wine was warm. Lao Dao poured a line of wine into his mouth, smacked his lips and wiped his mouth. He then placed his hands on his knees and stared at the muddy ground in a daze. Suddenly he turned to look at Li Yunxin. Brother Xing. He saw Li Yunxin crossing his arms and leaning on the railing of the post house. He then turned to look into the distance and said, I wonder what Brother Ji and Brother Lu are up to. They should be here by now. When the old Taoist heard him say this, he looked a little disappointed. But Li Yunxin quickly retracted his gaze and looked at him. He said softly, I understand. Chapter 571. Each country mobilized hundreds of thousands of soldiers and needed millions of people to support them. These people had probably conscripted all the laborers in the nearby countries. Now that the army has suffered a crushing defeat, it will be a natural disaster. If the snow falls early, it will be a great famine. If it was before, the Taoists of the Shenmen would still be here. Although they wouldn't do much, they could still help. At least they wouldn't let the demons harm people. But now, Li Yunxin smiled and shook his head. He reached out his hand outside the pavilion and caught a few snowflakes. He looked at them and said, the demons will soon bring chaos to the world. When natural and man-made disasters come together, I'm afraid corpses will be everywhere and starving people will be everywhere. Lu Gongzan's lips trembled. He suddenly closed his eyes and gritted his teeth. His beard trembled. I'm so sinful. I'm afraid I won't be able to sleep in peace for the rest of my life. Li Yunxin still smiled and said, it's not your fault. It's me. Lu Gongzan's eyes were still closed as he heaved a heavy sigh. Li Yunxin smiled again. Old Lu, tell me the truth. Do you really think this is a sin? Lu Gongzan opened his eyes. He froze at first and then furrowed his brows. Let me ask you this. What did you think of Yi Mo and Qing Chu? Li Yunxin said, at that time, did you hope for the two sides to fight a tug-of-war for hundreds of years? Or did you hope for one side to grow quickly and end the war as soon as possible? Lu Gongzan opened his mouth. Previously his eyes had been turbid like a zombie. But now, hearing Li Yunxin's words, although it didn't seem to be related to his thoughts, a glimmer of hope lit up in him. He furrowed his brows and thought for a while before saying, of course, it's better if the war ends earlier. At least the people don't have to suffer. So it ended early, Li Yunxin said. But I remember that many people died in the Yi army. Many of them fought to the death and didn't surrender. In order to strike fear into the Yi army, the Qing army once beheaded 30,000 captives at once. The Yi soldiers who died and the captives who were beheaded were all victims of that war. They were also ordinary people with wives and children. But if they don't die, the war will continue and more people will suffer. Li Yunxin slowly stopped smiling and looked at Lu Gongzan seriously. This is called labor pains. Good days, though relative, must be preceded by pains and sacrifices. Lu Gongzan was silent for a while. At this time, the ninth young master and the chicken spirit had gone somewhere. For the newborn ninth young master, it was the first time he experienced happiness to have so many good friends, and not have to worry about his fief being occupied by a big monster or being hunted by a demon. So he was carefree and happy like a child. Thus the area around the post house became quiet. For a moment, it was so quiet that even the rustling of falling snow could be heard. After a few breaths, Lu Gongzan finally said, Brother Xin is saying that these people who starve to death, freeze to death, and in the future, those who die because of the evil of demons are all sacrifices, necessary sacrifices and labor pains. But so many people and lives have been sacrificed. What can we get in exchange? Li Yunxin stared at Lu Gongzan. He looked at him seriously for a while and then said in a very quiet voice, as if he was afraid others would hear, in exchange for everything, Lao Dao furrowed his brows. What everything? Li Yunxin gently raised his hand and pointed at the sky. Not afraid of the power of celestials. He then pointed down. Not afraid of the power of demons. I once told you that I came from another world. In that world, what demons and cultivators can do, mortals can also do. Mortals can soar high in the sky and dive deep into the sea. His eyes were sincere and clear. People in this world can also do this. Lu Gongzhan's eyelids trembled violently. He sucked in a breath of cold air. Brother X and you, he turned his face and looked around as if afraid of being heard by a third person. He also lowered his voice. You did all these, for this purpose? Brother Xian, in your previous world there were also demons and cultivators. Maybe you did this? Did you do the same thing there? Li Yunxin didn't answer him directly. He just stood up and took a deep breath. Yesterday you asked me if the ninth young master would harm me if I brought him with me. The answer to that question is the same as the answer to this question. In the past, the ninth young master was under a lot of pressure like me. The feeling of that pressure was not good. But it could make people grow. If he could stand out from that kind of environment and survive, he would become a great demon that could dominate the world. Unfortunately, he failed. Speaking of this, Li Yunxin squinted his eyes and looked into the distance. Until now, I gave him a body at the peak of the realm of truth, a title and a fief. He was happy because he knew that he had me and the Lord Shinryu as his support. But because of this, it was difficult for him to make progress. We are his support, but we will also be his cage. If a person knew that he could always ask for help from someone, he wouldn't really put all his eggs in one basket to achieve something that he thought was unimaginable. It's the same. In the past, the Shenmen were also the cage and support of the human world. With them, people would never be a person. They would never think about, other than immortal spells, what other means could be used to obtain power that mortals dare not imagine. Lu Gongzhan was dumbfounded. He didn't even notice that the pot of wine in his hand had fallen to the ground. Only then did Li Yunxin smile slightly and look at him. Break their cage. Take away their crutches. This is what you and I are doing for them now. It's time for people to be real people. A surge of turbulent emotions surged in Lu Gongzhan's heart. When he walked into the pavilion, his heart was dead. He didn't know whether his heart was cold or warm, and he didn't know where the official road under his feet led to. But now his heart was burning again. It was as if all the wine in the pot had entered his throat, making his stomach feel warm. He stood up excitedly, restraining the surging emotions in his heart. He moved closer to Li Yunxin and said in a low but firm voice, I know. I knew it. Brother Xian always has a plan in his heart when he does things. No matter what others say, I have always known it in my heart. At this point, it seemed that there were no words that could express his emotions. Because of extreme excitement, Lao Dao's forehead was slightly steaming. He suddenly restrained his expression and repeated what Li Yunxin had said before, which sounded neither fish nor fowl in this world, word by word, we are comrades. Li Yunxin smiled and nodded. He didn't say anything but just reached out and patted Lu Gongzhan's shoulder. You and I know about this. Lao Dao nodded solemnly again. He looked radiant as if he had been reborn. At this moment, a dark cloud suddenly rolled in the distance, blowing away the snowflakes in the sky. That black cloud, like a black dragon, flew straight into the pavilion. The strong wind it created made old Taoist Lu lose his footing. He was blown several feet away before he managed to stand on the snowy ground and did not fall. Looking at this arrogant momentum, he knew that it was none other than Emperor Li. But Lu Gongzhan was still immersed in the excitement just now, and didn't care about this. He steadied himself on the snowy ground, nodded at Li Yunxin and walked away. His steps were steady and calm without any hesitation. Li Yunxin withdrew his gaze, and saw Emperor Li staring at him angrily. Brother Li, tell me the truth, do you know that little lady? Li Yunxin stared at the ghost emperor for a while and laughed. Which little lady? Emperor Li stared at him with his bell-like eyes and said loudly, which little lady? That night, Li Yunxin hurriedly put a finger in front of his lips. Brother Ji. That night I took a look at her, and I could see that her cultivation was extraordinary. She should have a great background. Brother Ji, please don't make it public. I know you have nothing to be afraid of, but it's better to have less trouble. Emperor Li snorted reluctantly. That's true. Do you know her or not? Li Yunxin sighed. What did she say to Brother Ji, and you suspect that I sent her there? It's fine if she said something. Emperor Li shouted angrily. But she said nothing. After saying this, a strange look appeared on his face. Ba 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 ba, bad luck. Bad luck. Looking at his reaction, Li Yunxin's face flashed a trace of surprise. But he hid it well. He pulled Emperor Li to sit beside the pavilion and looked at him seriously. Brother, you don't look good. If you trust me, please tell me. My cultivation is not even 1/10,000th of yours. But my brain is still a little flexible. Maybe I can give you some ideas? Emperor Li sat there angrily for a while. Then he frowned and slapped his thigh. Damn it. Bad luck, bad luck. When Emperor Li was an emperor, it was said that he was very dignified. But after he died and became a ghost, his temperament changed and he became like a living bandit. Maybe when he was an emperor, he yearned for this kind of free and unrestrained life. After cursing, he looked at Li Yunxin. Hey brother, you have a lot of ideas. Even the divine dragon loves you and I trust you too. Now I can only tell you, but you can't tell anyone else. Li Yunxin smiled sincerely. I always keep my mouth shut. If I don't want to say something, even the heavens can't pry a word out of me. The words, the heavens, which was full of banditry, won the favor of Emperor Li again. He sighed again and finally said, Alas. In my life I only liked beautiful women. Unfortunately, after I died there was no one that the ghost emperor liked. That night I finally met that young lady. She made me so happy that I was bursting with joy. Who cares where she came from, I will take her first. Li Yunxin was in awe. He gave a thumbs up. Fine clothes, fine horses, strong wine, and beautiful women. This is what a hero should pursue. Brother, your ambition is so much better than those stupid monsters. Emperor Li was pleased by this flattery. But he sighed again, but, alas. That night, Shinryu left and we said our goodbyes. I took the beauty to a secluded place. Emperor Li smacked his lips. I endured it for 2 nights. Until last night. I saw that the beauty was about to wake up. So I put 64 restrictions on her. I wanted to make it happen first. Chapter 572. Li Yunxin pricked up his ears and squinted his eyes like a cat. And then? Emperor Li sighed for a while and then spat. Bah. Bad luck. It's a stone core. Hearing this word, Li Yunxin was stunned for a while. Only then did he understand what Emperor Li meant. He was a doctor in his previous life. Although he was different from the doctors that the public knew, he knew a lot of obscure knowledge because of his identity. For example, the stone core actually referred to the stone girl. The private parts were closed because of congenital or acquired diseases. There were different kinds of diseases, some could be cured and some were incurable. In ancient times, because of the underdeveloped technology and superstition, this kind of patient was often regarded as very unlucky. But Li Yunxin was still stunned when he heard this word. Let's not talk about why he let Guqin Jun be taken away by Emperor Li. But in the end he still harbored a malicious thought in his heart. That zither lady looked noble and unsullied, and her mouth was full of brotherly love and worldly affairs. But in fact she not only killed him but also watched him die. For this kind of person, it would be too easy to let him die. When Li Yunxin was up to no good, she was the best. She should give him to Emperor Li and let the ghost emperor humiliate him. But no matter what he thought, he did not expect it to be like this. The stone girl. His big brother, Guqin Jun, looked like a woman and spoke like a woman. But he called himself brother. No, he never called himself brother. He liked to be called Young Dragon Master, or Guqin Jun. There must be women in this world who suffered from this disease, but it could not be Long Sun. Li Yunxin was stunned for a while and then he saw Emperor Li spit on the ground and sighed, Alas, so unlucky. I can't bear to throw her away. Bah bah bah, this is really a dilemma. I can't advance or retreat. Brother Li, what do you think we should do? Li Yunxin let out a sigh of relief. Brother? Did you look carefully? Could it be a man? I mean a eunuch? Emperor Li waved his hand and said, Eunuchs are nothing special. How could I not have seen them before? In the past I got tired of playing with them. I told those eunuchs to take off their pants and stand in front of. Realizing that he had made a slip of the tongue, he waved his hand and said, Anyway, no. You didn't see it? When I grabbed her breasts they were smooth and plump. When I rubbed her buttocks they were round and perky. I've seen countless women, but when have I ever seen such a stunning beauty? Alas, 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 it's a pity. Emperor Li the old Tish was lamenting again. However, Li Yunxin did not take it to heart. According to what he said, this zither monarch was really like a stone woman. However, for Li Yunxin there was actually another possibility. Perhaps it was only in his previous world that there was such a saying, angels, holy spirits, did not have gender. The sexless ones were the gods of some of the myths of his world. And in the eyes of the mortals of this world, how was the Zither monarch different from a god? A bold idea formed in his mind. However, he felt that his idea was infinitely closer to the truth. The Zither monarch was not a stone woman. In fact, strictly speaking, she was neither a woman nor a man. She was neutral or sexless. In his previous world, the angels and holy spirits of a certain religion were light or flame. They only appeared in human form so that the believers could see their true appearance. However, in order to maintain purity and holiness, the human body should be sexless. Furthermore, weren't they, the dragon sons, essentially made up of dragon essence and demon soul? It was only for the sake of walking on earth that they had a real body, dharma body, and fiend god body. Perhaps, because of certain reasons, the Zither monarch became sexless. However, according to Li Yunxin's previous understanding, a person's psychological sex did not necessarily match their physical sex. If she was born with a woman's body but had a man's temperament, it would not be strange for her to call herself a brother or a young dragon master. Or she had a woman's body and temperament, but in order to convince the masses, it was understandable that she pretended to be a man. Thinking of this, he carefully recalled the time when he took over the 9th young master's body and reconstructed his own body. In fact, there seemed to be a model in the unseen world. This model defined his general appearance when he condensed into a human body. For example, 4 or 5 limbs, abnormally thin or abnormally fat. As for the rest, he could do as he pleased. Therefore, there was the same Li Yunxin today. This meant that the Zither monarch's model was what he was now. The relationship between the reality of this world and the legend of his world, Li Yunxin could not fully understand for a while. But at this time, Emperor Li stretched out his hand and slapped the railing, immediately shaking the snow on the pavilion. "Brother, tell me, what should we do about this?" Only then did Li Yunxin look at him again. He pretended to frown and pondered for a while before saying, "So, according to what Brother Ji just said, that girl was stripped naked by you and looked at thoroughly, then she woke up. But she was seriously injured and couldn't break free from your inhibition. She didn't tell you anything you asked. Is this the current situation?" Emperor Li sighed, "Yes. Now Brother Liu is looking after her for me. Hey. I wanted to say goodbye to you so I came. Let's see what you have to say." Li Yunxin smiled and waved her hand. "Sai, it's not exactly brilliant. In fact, according to Brother Ji's experience, you should already have an idea. But being in this mountain, I couldn't see it clearly for a while. Let me say a few words. If Brother Ji thinks what I said is right, then I will help you to see the light." Li Yunxin's flattery was flawless, and Emperor Li enjoyed it very much. He increasingly felt that this Lord of Wei River was a wonderful person. No matter what he talked about, he was always eloquent and insightful, and could be said to be a peerless genius. And in his heart, he regarded him as a confidant. He thought that only a true hero like this deserved to be on the same level as him. So he frowned. "Hey. We are brothers, don't be so polite. Just say it and I will forgive you." Li Yunxin smiled. "Brother Ji, let me ask you first. You used to have a country and tasted many beauties. But you always felt that they were boring and not the people you were looking for. So what do you think is boring?" Emperor Li waved his hand. "Boring is boring. Talking and doing are boring, they are just empty shells. Humph. Interesting people are always interesting, but boring people are boring in their own way." Li Yunxin smiled. "Brother, you are very philosophical. Then think about it again. Do you like that girl because she is beautiful, or because she talks and does interesting things, or because she has a mysterious identity and a high level of cultivation, so she is different from the girls you have met before, and that is why you think she is so interesting?" Emperor Li frowned and thought for a while. Suddenly he was stunned and sighed. I see. I was just looking for something new. Alas, if it wasn't for your advice." Li Yunxin hurriedly interrupted him. No, Brother Ji, that is not what I mean. I mean, maybe it is not because of the novelty, the appearance, or the identity that you like this girl. In the past, Brother Ji felt that other women were boring, perhaps for the same reason." Emperor Li's eyes widened. "Soul, what?" Emperor Li's eyes widened. "Soulmate, what?" Li Yunxin smiled. "Soulmate." Then he spent half an hour to tell Emperor Li what soulmate was. But in fact, it was nothing more than the concept of love, chicken soup for the soul, and the philosophy of picking up girls in his world. For the people there, it was probably a cliché that caused their ears to grow calluses. But for Emperor Li, it was a passionate, bold, and original way of expressing himself. In the past, no one dared to say these things to the Ghost Emperor. Therefore, as he listened to Li Yunxin's words, he felt more and more that Li Yunxin was a wonderful person. Really wonderful. Finally, the ghost emperor slapped his thigh. Damn it. Brother Li, you are so right. I used to have nothing to say to those girls. Humph, how could they understand my feelings? This soul that my brother was talking about, is it? I just have to find someone I like. I am at the peak of the Shen realm and the girl is not bad either. When we quarrel, we will not seek death and we will not tremble in fear. Well, you are right, you are right. So, Li Yunxin looked at him earnestly. Brother Ji, you have actually entered a higher level of love. What you are after is not physical pleasure, not temporary indulgence, but pure spiritual enjoyment. What you want is true love. Love, the exchange of ideas between a man and a woman, is the most beautiful thing in the world. What does it have to do with the body and whether you are a stone girl or not? Aren't you tired of those pure physical intercourse long ago? Since this girl can satisfy your spiritual needs, and only she can make you feel this way, how can you lose her? What's there to worry about? You should know that there are so many women in the world who want physical enjoyment. Even you can do it yourself. Why should she be asked to do such a thing? Isn't it a stain to your soul, mate? The Emperor Li was dumbfounded. He sat in the pavilion in a daze for a while. Then he stood up abruptly. He bowed deeply to Li Yunxin and solemnly said, "Brother." Li Yunxin also stood up, held his elbow and said affectionately, "Brother." Emperor Li patted him on the arm again and again. Then he said, "Say no more, from now on you are my brother." Li Yunxin's eyes turned red. "With a brother like you, what else can I ask for?" Then he rolled his eyes and said, "But Brother Ji, you must remember. A sincere relationship must go through a lot of twists and turns. That girl did not listen to you for a while, so you temporarily restrained her. When she slowly unknots the knot in her heart and calms down, it will be easier to communicate and cultivate feelings. The road to happiness is strewn with setbacks, so don't rush. A soulmate is hard to find." Emperor Li said repeatedly, Of course, I will take good care of her when I go back, and wait for good things to happen." Chapter 573. Li Yunxin smiled. "Brother, you are in a good mood, but I have something to spoil your mood." That night, Shinryu came. Hearing this, Emperor Li frowned. "If you want to be a lobbyist for the immortal lord, you don't have to mention it. I was an emperor when I was alive, and I will be a ghost emperor after death. As an emperor, there is no reason for me to be below others." As he said so, the smile on his face disappeared. He took 2 steps in the pavilion and said, "I am not a genius who is willing to be below others. I also advise you to make plans as soon as possible. It is a chaotic world now. It is an era where heroes are born. Don't let this great future go to waste." Li Yunxin smiled bitterly and shook his head. "If I knew you would say this, I would have thought about it. Since that is the case, let's not talk about anything else." His face turned serious and he cupped his fists. "My journey to the east may be dangerous. If I ever need your help in the future for the sake of today." Emperor Li waved his hand. "Hey, don't be so formal. Just a word from Brother Li." Li Yunxin was touched and speechless. He nodded and strode out of the pavilion. At this moment the snow was getting heavier and heavier, and the world was covered in white. The 9th young master and the chicken spirit were nowhere to be seen. Lu Gongzan seemed to have gone into the forest to do something. Only Li Yunxin's lonely figure was left in the snow, like a grain of sand in the sea. After a while, Emperor Li, who was watching him leave from the pavilion, vaguely heard a poem in the sound of the wind and snow. Outside the pavilion, beside the ancient road, the wind and snow reached the sky. At the edge of the sky, at the corner of the earth, friends are scattered. He used to be the emperor of the Li kingdom, and it was hard to say whether he was dignified or dissolute. But he was still a great emperor. Although he was not a master of poetry, his ability to appreciate poetry was above the standard of this era. Now, listening to Li Yunxin reciting this poem in the wind and snow, although he didn't feel amazed and knew that it couldn't be considered a masterpiece by a great master, but it was rare to see it fit the occasion, and it indeed had a unique style. Thereupon other feelings arose in his heart. In the old days when he was an emperor, it was most difficult to find a master of both pen and sword. Occasionally he would obtain some, but they were all unworthy of the name. Even now, one could not say that Li Yunxin was well versed in literature just because of a few lines of poetry. But for someone as powerful as him to have such a taste, it was enough to make him, the former emperor, sigh in admiration. It was really a wonderful person. He sighed in his heart and watched Li Yunxin's figure disappear into the wind and snow. Then he turned and left. About a quarter of an hour later, Li Yunxin met Lu Gongzan 3 miles away from the post house. Old Lu started a fire and sat on a fallen tree by the roadside. When he saw Li Yunxin, he stood up and said, "Brother Xan, how did it go?" Li Yunxin waved his hand and went to the fire, stretching out his hand to roast. He frowned and said, "Everything went smoothly. Everything was expected." Then he put his hand into his bosom and took out a small jade bottle. This was something he found in the Hall of Qi. It was said that it could revive the dead and grow flesh and bones. He dipped his finger into the jade bottle and kept it. He wiped it evenly on his hand before wiping it on his face. After doing all this, he let out a long sigh. "What about the two of them? According to what you said, they should be on their way. Although the Lord Tongqian's cultivation level is high, I think he should be fine with the pheasant looking after him. I also told Bai Yunxin about this before. She should go and find them." Li Yunxin nodded. The winter is not easy. Earlier, when the evil lord saw him make a cloak for himself and saw his face turn red from the cold, he said that he missed the feeling of being human and still had lingering feelings. This misunderstood Li Yunxin. In fact, it was just a side effect of him forcefully dying several times in a very short period of time and seizing bodies. His spirit was injured, and this injury appeared on his body. His skin became weak and started to feel cold, pain, and peeling like a normal person. This kind of thing could be considered a real itch. His physical body under his skin was still incomparably strong. If it was inconvenient, it was just an eyesore and not so pretty. This was not worth mentioning for other heroes. However, for Li Yunxin it was a big deal. Lu Gongzan knew a little. Now that he saw Li Yunxin doing these things, he felt a little happy. Because this brother Xian was actually more like a human. The two of them sat in the wind and snow around the small fire for a while. Old Lu said, "Then, shall we go to Dingzhou now?" Li Yunxin didn't move at all. She couldn't bear to move her hands away from the fire. "No, cold. The wind is strong. My face hurts." Old Lu smiled and sighed. "There are so many magic treasures. Surely we can find one that is suitable?" Li Yunxin shook his head again. "It's not about whether it is suitable or not. The main reason we are going to Dingzhou is to find someone. But if the person I am looking for really exists, right now he must be like a frightened rabbit. Also, I guess he is most likely pretending to be a normal person. So, we should also pretend to be normal people. So." As he said this, he reached out and pulled a piece of firewood from the snow in front of him and threw it into the fire. However, the accuracy was not good. The firewood fell to the side. Lu Gongzan unconsciously pushed it through the air. So, he pushed the firewood into the fire. So, you see, we are used to using supernatural powers when we do things. It is as normal as drinking water and breathing. We need to get used to being a normal person. Speaking to this point, his expression turned cold. He suddenly straightened his body. Lao Dao's expression also changed. He frowned. "What?" Li Yunxin waved his hand. He reached out and grabbed into the distance. 10 steps away from him, a large cloud of snowflakes erupted. He grabbed a furry, plump rabbit from the air. Then he pulled the rabbit over through the air and lovingly stroked it. He raised his eyes and asked Lu Gongzan, "Do you know how to roast a rabbit?" Old Lu sighed helplessly. "Brother Xan is also using supernatural powers. I think you are." "This is the first time I have seen such heavy snow in years." Li Yunxin laughed. "Even if you become a demon, you also need to have a heart that discovers beauty and feels life." When Li Yunxin first entered Qinghe County and was arrested in prison, he told Constable Xing that his family lived in a small mountain village in Dingzhou. That was one of the few truths he had told. The name Dingzhou originally had the meaning of stability and peace. Since it needed stability and peace, it could not have been a good place in the past. This was a small county on the border of the Qin kingdom. It was very small, and it had been plagued by banditry for nearly 100 years. Only a provincial capital could barely be considered a large city. The rest were unranked villages and towns, mostly scattered in the mountains and fields. Some of their existence was not even known by the government, much less registered. On an early morning 3 days later, Li Yunxin and Lu Gongzan stood on a small mountain. Looking down from the top of the low mountain, one could see the dense forest covered in branches by the heavy snow. There was a small village hidden in the forest with about a dozen households. Faint smoke rose from the roofs of 5 or 6 households. There should be people there. Lao Dao saw Li Yunxin's hometown for the first time. He looked down carefully and said, "Which household did Brother Xan live in?" Without batting an eyelid, Li Yunxin pointed down the mountain. "There." Lu Gongzan looked over. He found that there was nothing there. It was next to the forest, just a gentle slope. He knew that after Li Yunxin escaped, someone had come to search carefully. When they searched, they tore apart the house but found nothing. In the past, my parents lived in seclusion, he said. It was a good thing for those people. Lu Gongzan realized that Li Yunxin's tone and words had become solemn and serious. Perhaps this place did mean something to him. Then the two of them slowly walked down the mountain. There was a mountain path that had been stepped on. Now that the mountain path was covered in snow, it was hard to see clearly. However, it seemed that someone had passed not long ago and left a trail of footprints in the snow. When they walked into the forest, they bumped into snow-covered branches and snow poured down. Now that the snow had stopped, there was a bright sun on the horizon. But the weather was even colder. As soon as the snow fell on Li Yunxin's neck, he was so cold that he hissed and shrunk his head. While walking, he said, "My guess is like this. Since some people think that I am the person they are looking for, there must be some factors that make them believe it. Otherwise, they wouldn't have spent half a year and used a lot of resources to bet on me." Lu Gongzan nodded. "That makes sense." Li Yunxin breathed into his hand and said, "So what is this factor? In my opinion, there are only a few factors. One is the geographical factor. For example, the person they are looking for must have been born in a certain area. So they cast a wide net and looked for abnormalities. Finally, they found that my parents were abnormal. Since I am a dragon among men, they naturally targeted me." Lu Laodao nodded. "Yes. The other factor is the time factor. The person must have been born at a certain time. This point is very similar to the previous point. When investigating the geographical factors, they must have noticed this point. So the two are similar. The next factor, because of the various supernatural powers in this world, is very complicated and uncontrollable. I can't say for now. But combining the 2 points, I have a good reason to think that we should look around here. Maybe we will find something unexpected." Lu Laodao listened attentively to him and nodded frequently. In the end, he frowned slightly. "Then Brother X, and what is this good reason?" Li Yunxin looked at him and said seriously, "Intuition." Laodao was silent for a while. Brother Xian's words make sense. But in fact, there was something else that Li Yunxin didn't say. Just 3 days ago at night, when he was slowly looking around at the demons in the night sky, he inadvertently noticed that there seemed to be a person hiding in the shadows 10 miles away from him. At that time, at that place, the person who appeared was not an ordinary person. Li Yunxin felt that the person's figure was somewhat familiar. He sighed in his heart and continued walking through the forest. Chapter 574. After a quarter of an hour, they finally arrived at the entrance of the village. The houses in the village were low and covered with snow. There was no road and no sound of people. They seemed to be afraid of the cold and didn't get up early. After the autumn harvest, winter was a long period of leisure time. In Li Yunxin's previous world, there was a saying called cat winter. This world was probably the same. There was a big green stone at the entrance of the village. Next to the green stone was an old tree with twisted roots. Now the yellow leaves had fallen and were replaced by white leaves. Li Yunxin walked to the side of the old tree and gently placed her hand on the trunk. He stood there and looked at the village for a while, then said softly, "My father," but he paused. "Li Chunfeng set up many restrictive spells here. But my cultivation was not high enough, so I didn't use them. Today I walked back and slowly found them." He sighed. "I used to see this tree in my house over there, for more than 10 years. Lao Dao could understand the feeling of time has changed, and revisiting the old place. He sighed with him. Brother Xen must have wanted to come here to play at that time. After all, he was a child and would be very lonely. Do you want to go into the village and take a look? But Li Yunxin smiled and shook his head. To be honest, I don't want to at all. He put down his hand and gently patted it. This kind of place, this kind of village, has nothing to do with hard work and simplicity. This village doesn't even have a name. The dozen or so families that live here are all refugees or their ancestors fled here. Selfish, stupid, bigoted, narrow-minded, greedy. Alas, it's not easy to eat and wear warm clothes in this kind of place. How can there be good families? Li Yunxin snorted. There's no one here who broke off my engagement, looked down on me, or slapped my face. What's the point of going in now? I've already checked just now. They're all ordinary people. Let's go. The old Taoist was stunned. You're leaving just like that? Li Yunxin had already started walking. If the person we're looking for really exists, he should be around this village. There won't be anyone in the village. But after all, it's an old place. I'm just here to take a look. Since my home has been demolished, this place has nothing to do with me anymore. In the time it took to say these few words, he had already walked more than 10 steps. Lao Dao sighed, thinking that his brother Xan really did look like a cultivator. On the other hand, he himself had cultivated for dozens of years, and later received the true inheritance. However, he still seemed like a secular person. He sighed emotionally. When he looked up, he saw that Li Yunxin had stopped in front of him. Lu Gongzan moved closer and saw a stone niche. This was a very common thing in the villages of the Midland. Many spirit creatures were hiding in the mountains, and some of them would occasionally show themselves. Thus he was worshipped as a deity, and thus was made into a statue. The height of this stone niche was only knee-high. There was a statue in the niche, with a round face, long eyes and 5 strands of long beard. There were no obvious features. In fact, most of the statues carved by the people of the Midland according to their own deities, were exactly the same as this one. Only the small plaque on top of the stone niche could tell which deity this statue belonged to. Lu Gongzan's eyes moved to the top of the shrine, which was half covered by snow. He saw 3 shallow engravings, Wolf King Temple. He asked, "Brother Xen, is there anything unusual here?" Li Yunxin was silent for a while, then said softly, "When I left in spring, this thing wasn't here yet." So Lu Gongzan realized the subtle seriousness of this matter. It wasn't strange for a spirit creature to show itself in a remote mountain and pretend to be a deity. However, the location of this mountain village was very sensitive. Any unusual sign might have a deeper meaning. Therefore, it was more likely that the spirit creature was here for Brother Xen or that person. Regarding that person these days, Lu Gongzan had always heard Li Yunxin call him Prince in a teasing tone. He didn't know whether it was an illusion or not, but occasionally he felt that Brother Xian's tone was a bit jealous. Li Yunxin had told many of his secrets to Lu Gongzan, but this was the only thing that he didn't say clearly. Therefore Lao Dao only knew that some people and some forces thought that Brother Xian was an important person, a chosen one. He used to think so himself. But after these days he slowly realized that those people might have found the wrong person. Their heaven's chosen one was someone else. This time he came here to try his luck. He didn't think that he would definitely find that person, but at least he wanted to find some clues. These thoughts flashed through his mind. On the other side, Li Yunxin had already bent down and gently pressed his hand on the stone niche. Some kind of invisible power spread out with a buzz, and a small whirlwind blew away the snow on the top of the stone niche and around it. Then he straightened up and rubbed his hands. What a guy! Lu Gongzan knew what he was talking about. Just like the statue of the Dragon King in the Wei City's Dragon King Temple had Reiki attached to it, this statue of the Wolf King also had Reiki attached to it. This meant that this was a true god. To a certain extent, it could sense the desires of mortals, and it could also use this to enjoy incense. As soon as he finished speaking, he saw someone walking over from afar. Behind the old tree and the blue stone at the entrance of the village was a shallow, jade-like river. The water was abundant in summer, but now that it was winter, the surface of the river was frozen, and the soil underneath was exposed. The person came from the other side of the river, and it looked like an old man with a walking stick. He wore a linen robe with patches, and his thin body shivered in the cold wind. But his legs were still nimble. He didn't slow down at all when crossing the ice on the river. It was as if he didn't walk but floated. When he stepped on the snow again, there was not a single footprint. The person approached the two and immediately bowed deeply. "Two great immortals have come from afar. Sorry for not going out to meet you." Li Yunxin didn't say anything, so Lu Gongzan spoke for him. Lao Dao's Taoist robe was already tattered because of the pain he suffered in Yunshan. Now Li Yunxin picked a few magic treasures from his pinky finger for him. He was wearing a dark purple celestial robe of the sun, moon and stars. From a distance, this robe didn't look special, just like a silk robe worn by ordinary rich men. However, once spiritual energy was used, the sun, moon and stars would appear on it and colorful light would flow. It could be said to be extremely exaggerated, very suitable to fool ignorant people. He wore a red lotus crown with golden threads inlaid with jade, and a pair of dark cloud shoes on his feet. In his sleeves, there was also a dragon's beard brush and a 2-feet-long sword of clear light. Walking on the road, anyone who glanced at him would know that he was either a powerful Taoist, or a rich and powerful high official or noble. In short, there were only 2 words written on his body: not to be trifled with. Therefore the old man, or the old ghost, after floating over, looked at Lu Gongzan. Now that Li Yunxin was in the profound realm, he could freely control his demonic energy. Even if he stood here and asked the old ghost to spend a whole day investigating, he wouldn't be able to find anything. But Lu Gongzan, Li Yunxin, after the battle at Yunshan, used elixirs to push his cultivation to the peak of the transcendent state. However, he still hadn't fully adapted to this profound state, so he often couldn't control it and revealed the aura of a powerful cultivator. This kind of aura, if it was an ordinary person or a rogue cultivator in the Jianghu, they wouldn't be able to detect it. But this old ghost seemed to have some cultivation, so he knew that the person in front of him must be a powerful cultivator. Lu Gongzhan's face was as dark as still water. After waiting for the old ghost to speak, he was silent for 2 breaths. Then he shouted in a low voice, "Do you know your crime?" He used to travel in the Jianghu, and his ability to read people was no less than Li Yunxin's. Now he knew that Brother Xian wanted to ask him questions. And seeing that the old ghost didn't panic at all, he knew that he must be a cunning person. To deal with this kind of person, the right thing to do was to scare him first. Unexpectedly, the old ghost slowly narrowed his eyes and said, "Deity, what crime did I commit?" Lu Gongzhan sneered and pointed at the Wolf King Temple. "You, a lonely wild ghost, dare to appear in the world and call yourself a deity? Isn't that a crime punishable by death?" Hearing this, the old ghost was silent for a while. Then, he suddenly straightened his body, straightened his hunched back. His back straightened and his body expanded in the wind. In just 2 breaths' time, he had become a big ghost with a green face and fangs as tall as 2 people, with tattered clothes hanging on his body. Then he let out a rumbling laugh. "Why, you stupid Taoist, until now you still don't know? Daotong Kenzo is no more, now it's the world of demons. How can you be so arrogant?" He stomped his big feet on the snowy ground, but his voice could only be heard by the 2 people in front of him. "I advise you to be smart and leave. Our Wolf King has sought the protection of a little demon, with the protection of Shinryu and Dragon's Son. How can you afford to offend him?" Li Yunxin snorted with a smile. Lu Gongzhan got into character and also frowned. "What little demon protection? What nonsense are you talking about? If you want to harm the people of this area, ask me first if I allow it." The big ghost that the old man turned into became proud again. "Hee, a few days ago Shenmen was destroyed. You don't know this news? What harm to the people? That's not something I would do. First of all, I was originally from this village, but after I died I became a deity a few hundred years later, so I naturally have to protect this area. Second, our Shinryu and Wei River Lord also ordered, from now on, the protection of the people will be done by us demons, and we will not harm the villagers." At this point, Li Yunxin finally said, "Having attained the Tao for hundreds of years. Wang Difu, don't you recognize me?" After saying this, he took 2 steps forward, letting the big ghost see him more clearly. Although his voice was not loud, it was very clear. As he walked forward, the creaking sound of the snow beneath his feet could be heard clearly. When the old ghost heard the name Wang Difu, he was stunned. Then he widened his big eyes, carefully looking at Li Yunxin. His body suddenly bent down like a leaking balloon, and turned into the old man in linen clothes again. You are..." Li Yunxin breathed into his hands and rubbed his hands. "When my parents were still alive, you often sent some mountain and river seafood over. I knew that you were not in good health. But how did you become a ghost cultivator with hundreds of years of cultivation?" Chapter 575. After listening to Li Yunxin's words, they realized that he was also from this village. But he died less than a year ago, not some ghost king with hundreds of years of cultivation. But even if a mortal died, becoming a ghost cultivator by chance wouldn't have this kind of ability. Looking at his appearance, he could transform into an evil ghost to scare people. He should be a cultivator with an intent. But how could geniuses be everywhere in this world? He must have had some kind of fortuitous encounter. Lu Gongzhan coldly looked at this ghost cultivator and said to Li Yunxin, "Brother Xen, this old ghost was arrogant just now. Now that he recognized you, he immediately lost his mind. I guess he knows something. Arrest him first. Interrogate him carefully, then destroy his soul." Li Yunxin casually looked at her fingernails and said, "Do whatever you want." Weren't these words meant for the old ghost to hear? The old ghost hurriedly said, "It's a misunderstanding. I didn't know you were the young master of the Li family. If I knew you were the young master of the Li family, these things wouldn't have happened. I can't thank you enough." Li Yunxin glanced at him. "Oh?" At this time, someone came out of the village. He probably saw the 2 imposing figures at the entrance of the village and came out to see something new. But when he saw Lu Laodao's clothes, he hurriedly ran back as if his clothes were very scary. The old ghost said, "Since it's the young master, I'll take the young master to see Lord Wolf. Lord Wolf also wants to see the young master." The old ghost's attitude changed from arrogance to deference. Li Yunxin and Lu Laodao knew there must be some inside story. The two of them now had the cultivation to move unhindered in the world, so there was nothing to be afraid of. So they raised their eyebrows. Okay. You lead the way. The old ghost looked at Lu Gongzan again. Lu Laodao coughed. If I say go then go. Tell me in detail along the way. Only then did old ghost step forward, leading the two people to the mountain forest north of the village. Since this old thing had become a ghost not long ago, his temperament was similar to those new ghosts. In fact, he was somewhat crazy. Before he had been threatening them, but after a few steps he began to babble like an old man. Before Li Yunxin and Lu Gongzan could ask, he had already told them everything he knew. Ayaya little Gongzi, I thought you were killed. Who would have thought that I would become a disciple of an expert, and now I look like I am living a life of luxury. The old ghost had read some books when he was alive. Therefore his words were appropriate. Speaking of my cultivation, it's all thanks to you. In the words of our wolf lord, it's fate. Li Yunxin glanced at Lu Gongzan. Oh, how could it be fated? How did you die? Listening to the old ghost repeatedly mention Wolf Lord, and seeing that Lu Gongzan was at the peak of the transcendent state, he didn't seem to be afraid. It seemed that he had great respect for the so-called Wolf Lord. Listening to his words, it seemed that this old ghost had also told Wolf Lord about Li Yunxin's family, and Wolf Lord was very interested in that matter. It was just that they didn't know how much he knew. A wild monster. He was actually interested in him. Li Yunxin and Lu Gongzan exchanged glances. This matter was within their expectations but also unexpected. One of them said that Li Yunxin had long speculated that there should be some clues nearby. The other was that, it seemed that someone had deliberately come to their door. Hearing Li Yunxin's question, the old ghost laughed. Little Gongzi's family is not ordinary people. It's a pity that I haven't seen it for more than 10 years. In the spring after little Gongzi left home. Not long after, someone came to the door again. In fact, when the two swordsmen found Li Yunxin, Wang Difu had already seen it. In the past, when Li Yunxin's family lived in seclusion in the mountain village, it was true that they could use magic to create all kinds of food and clothing. However, there was a saying in the Book of Attainment, all things in the universe are constant. It meant that all things in the universe followed a rule that was eternal and unchanging. This unchanging referred to the total amount. This description was a bit profound for people in this era, but for Li Yunxin it was easy to understand. He could understand it as the conservation of total amount. Using magic to create something could be seen as temporarily borrowing energy from the universe to create something out of thin air. However, as time went by, the borrowed energy would eventually be returned, so the magic would gradually lose its effectiveness. Therefore, using the same method of turning stones into gold, it was only a trick used by those with low cultivation, temporarily bluffing people, and soon it would turn into stone again. And for those with high cultivation, the things created could only lose their effectiveness after thousands of years. For mortals it was almost eternal. But for cultivators, there was a problem. If Li Yunxin began to eat all kinds of things created by magic from the age of 1 and then cultivated. Moreover, he was not a genius and his aptitude was only not bad. Then he might have to stumble on this path for hundreds of years. Maybe he would have the chance to enter the realm of supreme indifference and live for thousands of years. Then, when that time came, the things that were created by magic that he had absorbed into his body would slowly return to their original state. Although it wouldn't hurt his bones or cause him to die, there would always be a hidden danger of an unstable foundation. This was also the reason why cultivators had to eat grains like ordinary people before they reached a high realm and needed mortals to worship them. It was also because of the same reason, coupled with factors like fun and hiding their tracks, that Li Yunxin's family also needed a lot of miscellaneous things in the past. Some things could be solved through magic. But there were always things that couldn't be solved. For example, for fairies and immortals with noble and pure temperaments, how could they use magic to dig a cesspool for a child? Even if there were delicious wild animals and mushrooms on the mountain, it was not good to ask the fairy and Sendo to wear short clothes and tie up their hair to catch them. In fact, people spent most of their time in these small things that they usually didn't think of but actually took a lot of effort. Therefore they would occasionally find someone to do it for them. This Wang Difu was an old man in the village. He used to be educated and had a good temperament and appearance. Li Chunfeng and Shang Guanyu talked to him about a small matter. In the following 10 years they only had a little contact, asking him to do some chores, and giving him some money. In a sense, the old man was like a permanent worker, or hired worker in his family. After Li Chunfeng and Shang Guanyu died in the thunderstorm, Li Yunxin didn't have much contact with the villagers. However, when he was a child he ate and wore good clothes. At the age of 14 or 15, his body had also grown up and was much stronger than the long-term malnourished people in the village, so no one dared to cause trouble for him. Then 2 swordsmen came and he fled. After that, there was no one in the Yu family for a month. This Wang Difu boldly came to see them one night. Through the clues, he felt that something unusual had happened here. An enemy had come to visit. Most of the people in the village had grudges and criminal records. He was very receptive to this kind of thing and didn't feel surprised. Unexpectedly, that night turned out to be the turning point of his fate. 2 more cultivators came to investigate Li Yunxin's family. Maybe they were people from the Xianmen. Maybe they were people from the Freemasons. Maybe they were some other forces that heard the news and wanted to take advantage of them, but it didn't matter. The newcomers tore down the entire house and searched carefully, not caring that their actions would alarm the villagers. Wang Difu was blocked in the courtyard by the newcomers and was tied up. He stayed up all night in fear. After the 2 cultivators tore down the house and didn't find anything, they interrogated him at dawn. Naturally, he didn't know anything, so he was tossed aside. At that time, the cultivators probably didn't want to take the life of a mere mortal, just like when the 9th young master brushed away Li Yunxin, sending Wang Difu flying 30 feet away and crashing into a pile of rocks. But for an old man, this was a fatal injury. Just as the old man was on the verge of death, another person suddenly came. At this point, they had already climbed up the mountain. The mountain path was difficult to walk, but the 3 of them weren't ordinary people. In less than half an hour, they had climbed over 3 mountain ridges and entered deep into the mountains. The reason why Li Chunfeng and Shang Guanyu chose to live in seclusion here was because Dingzhou was remote and sparsely populated. Less than 10% of the territory was inhabited, and the rest was all mountains and wilderness. Even with their abilities, they couldn't completely explore the surroundings. Now that they were deep in this place, there were no signs of human habitation. If a person had lived here since childhood, he would probably feel that the whole world was nothing but an endless forest, and he wouldn't know where to go to get out. In fact, if one wasn't a cultivator or a monster, it would be very difficult to find the right way. In Li Yunxin's time, there were cases of travelers wandering around in the forest for several days and eventually dying in a place where they could see the road within 10 minutes, let alone in this kind of environment. Swamps, rivers, valleys, cliffs, beasts, mosquitoes, and miasma. These things formed a barrier, firmly isolating the people and things in the mountain from the outside. "You came, it's Lord Wolf." The old ghost was excited and gestured as he spoke. "Lord Wolf is the mountain wolf of this mountain. He has cultivated for more than 900 years. Lord Wolf is a demon with a very kind heart. He doesn't eat people, but he only wants to protect this place and become a mountain god. He didn't know our village existed before. Because of that thunderstorm, he was curious and found us. That night, he saw 2 evil Taoists committing murder. Hey, he used his magical power and tore them apart." Speaking of this, the old ghost gritted his teeth again. That Taoist head rolled next to my face. I was still breathing, thinking, they all say that these are immortals. In the end, it was still immortals who killed me. Eating immortals' meat might be able to live, maybe I can also become an immortal. I used the rest of my strength. That Taoist's skin was too thick, I couldn't bite through it, so I ate his eyeballs and the bits and pieces in his neck. The old ghost became more and more excited as he spoke. He looked like he wanted to elaborate further. Li Yunxin said, "Then you choked to death and became a ghost cultivator?" The old ghost was stunned, then said resentfully, "Oh, little Gongzi guessed it. Then I choked to death. Lord Wolf said that seeing my appearance, I was a promising material, so he saved me and made me a ghost cultivator." Li Yunxin smiled. "With this kind of will to live, you are indeed a talent. I didn't know you were such a person before." Hearing his praise, the old ghost became happy again. He blinked his drooping old eyes. "Lord Wolf asked me about this place, so I told him about little Gongzi's family. Lord Wolf said that your family must also be cultivators, maybe you have a cultivation method in your hands. If I knew about you earlier, maybe I could invite you to the cave to drink and talk merrily and learn from you. So now I see little Gongzi again. This is fate. I will take little Gongzi to see Lord Wolf. If little Gongzi really has some cultivation method, give it to Lord Wolf, maybe Lord Wolf will help little Gongzi take revenge." Hearing this, Li Yunxin and Lu Gongzan looked at each other, and their footsteps slowed slightly. Things were really as this old ghost said, then they were wrong. Dingzhou's mountains were vast, and no one knew how many demons were hidden in the mountains. People didn't know, and the demons themselves didn't know either. Perhaps this Lord Wolf was indeed just an ordinary demon, and he indeed had some ideals to become a mountain god and cultivate. But mountains were separated by mountains, so he didn't know that there were people living in the distant mountains, and 3 important people, who would affect the whole world, lived there. Because of the thunderstorm, he went to take a look after more than a month, and saw cultivators demolishing houses and killing people. He took care of the cultivators and then heard these things from the old ghost's mouth, so he became interested in Taoist magic. These were all common sense. However, according to common sense, it wasn't what Li Yunxin was looking for. Seeing the two of them hesitate, the old ghost immediately said, "Huh? What are you thinking? Don't think of running, you can't escape from Lord Wolf's palm." He was a new ghost, so it was reasonable for him to be eccentric, so Li Yunxin was too lazy to argue with him. In fact, the old ghost also didn't know that his life was now in the hands of Li Yunxin. If he really lost interest and wanted to leave with a wave of his hand, this ghost's soul would be scattered and scattered. But Lu Gongzan said in a low voice, "Go to the east, this is the direction after all. Let's wait and see." Li Yunxin thought for a while and didn't say anything. As a result, it turned out that his choice was correct. About an hour later, after going deep into the mountains, the view suddenly opened up. Originally, it looked like a white mountain with black water. The trunks of the towering trees were covered with snow, looking gray and black. The main colors between heaven and earth were gray and white, and occasionally there were scattered pine and cypress trees, so that the scenery in the forest was not too monotonous. However, after turning around a call, the view suddenly opened up. In the dense forest appeared a large, flat, naturally formed stone platform. The stone platform was stacked layer by layer, like many huge squaring stones stacked together. In other seasons there should be water in the platform. Thinking about the water flowing from one step to another, falling into many small waterfalls, it should be a very beautiful scene. And the water originally came from a higher place. The stone platform was backed by a huge stone wall, as if God used a sharp axe to split the mountain in half. A waterfall flew down from the top of the mountain, like a line of the Milky Way pouring down. But it was now early winter. And because of the changes in the chi of heaven and earth, the cold wave of winter came very quickly. As a result, the waterfall that hung down from the mountain was frozen into a huge line of ice in the air, contrasting beautifully with the layer of ice on the stone platform and the small waterfall. It was as if time had frozen and the water had also frozen. At the bottom of the stone wall there was a doorway. It could be seen that it had originally been formed naturally, but it had been carefully renovated. Now, although there were no flying eaves and arches, just a simple and unsophisticated appearance, the magnificent scene behind it was still extraordinary. When Li Yunxin saw this scene, he inwardly sighed in admiration. Then he saw a figure standing in front of the doorway. When he was in Rong City in the state of Yu, he had seen a wolf-headed Taoist wolf. Now that he saw this person again, he felt that he was somewhat familiar. This was because this person also had the head of a wolf. But compared to Taoist wolf, his appearance was between that of a human and that of a wolf. But not only did this not make him feel familiar, it made him even more terrifying. This should be the Lord Wolf that old devil had mentioned. This Lord Wolf wore a green silk robe, and his figure was quite burly. From afar he looked like a rich man, but he was only one person. When Li Yunxin had pressed his hand on the shrine to check the spiritual energy within, this Lord Wolf must have sensed something and knew that a guest had arrived. When old devil saw this Lord Wolf, he immediately danced with joy. "Young master, look, this is our Lord Wolf." But Li Yunxin's face was expressionless, and even Lu Gongzan's expression did not change. Since this so-called Lord Wolf lived in the mountains and did not know of the existence of the village, and did not go to the state of Yi to participate in the battle between the demons and the Xianmen, it was obvious that he was not a powerful demon. Looking at the aura that he exuded, he was probably not at the peak of the transcendent state. There must be many demons like him. He achieved Tao in the vast mountains and slowly became famous. Because he did not have much power and did not like to cause trouble, he was not well known. In fact, he was somewhat similar to the mortals who lived in the mountains. They were all demons who had not seen the world. But this demon knew about the protection of a small demon. Could it be that he found out by chance? While he was thinking about this, he saw Lord Wolf at the entrance of the cave lift his robe. He stepped on the ice on the ground and strode over. The ice was slippery. But every step he took shattered the ice, so he walked very steadily. The four of them were about 20 to 30 steps away when Lord Wolf laughed heartily. "Old thing, where did you bring the guest from? Our place is deserted, how rare." Lord Wolf was even more enthusiastic than Old Devil. From what he said, it seemed that he was happy because he rarely saw any friends at this moment. But Li Yunxin was no longer the person who had just entered the world of demons. He knew that the more friendly and human the demons looked, the more difficult it was to deal with them. Those who would grimace fiercely the moment they saw each other were much easier to guess. Old Ghost also laughed and said as if he was reporting good news, Master Wolf, this old man has brought you that young master. His master is also here. After saying this he took a few steps forward. Lord Wolf, do you still remember? The lay bow that this old man mentioned before and the young master, the Taoist priest who came to our village? Tao scriptures, mantras. Hearing this, Lord Wolf's eyes lit up. He grinned and took even bigger steps, reaching out his hairy hand to the two people. You two, nice to meet you, nice to meet you. Hello, hello. Hearing these two words, Li Yunxin and Lu Gongzan were both stunned. They realized that they might have found the right place. Nice to meet you, and hello. These were words that Li Yunxin had said before and Lu Gongzan also knew it now. Chapter 576. While they were stunned, Lord Wolf had already walked in front of them. Only then did they see that his green satin robe was actually a little shabby. It looked like he had just taken it off someone. There were also 3 white spots on his forehead. Taoist wolf from Rong City and country, you claimed that he came from the extreme north. He said that the true fire snow wolves there all had such a mark on their foreheads. From this, it seemed that this Lord Wolf was not a mountain wolf who had achieved the Tao as the old ghost had said. Perhaps he was also from the extreme north. However, just as Lord Wolf's hand reached out, Li Yunxin suddenly bowed. I'm sorry to disturb you, Lord Wolf, while I'm wandering around. Seeing Brother Xian's behavior, Lu Gongzan knew that he must have a plan. He also bowed and put on the appearance of an otherworldly master without saying a word. But Lord Wolf did not feel embarrassed. In fact, Li Yunxin even felt that when he withdrew his hand, his face looked as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. He remembered this feeling in his heart. Lord Wolf laughed. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? My place is a remote and desolate place with few people. Today, seeing this young master come, I'm more than happy. Oh, is this Gao Gong the teacher of young Master Li? Nice to meet you. Please come in, please come in. The old ghost also danced at the side. Lord Wolf, can I cultivate after obtaining the Tao? Can I cultivate? Lord Wolf laughed. Yes, bring the guest into the cave first. One was an old ghost and the other was Lord Wolf. Neither of them looked like scheming fellows. He was beaming with joy and elation. They did not hide their yearning for the Tao at all. In the past, outside the mountain, if a demon showed such a desire he would probably be attacked by a group of cultivators. But now, it was unknown whether this Lord Wolf was inexperienced or he thought that the Shenmen had been destroyed. He also knew that a little demon was protecting him, so he was not afraid. When he talked about the Tao, it was as if he already had it in his bag. However, he had repeatedly mentioned nice to meet you, and nice to meet you, just now. This subtle contrast made Li Yunxin frown. Things might not be so simple. However, with his current cultivation, what kind of dragon's pool or tiger's den couldn't he go to? Therefore, the two of them remained calm and followed Old Ghost and Lord Wolf into the cave. The cave was just like the mountain. They all looked close and short, but in reality they were both far and tall existences. When they walked past the ice platform and arrived at the entrance of the cave, they discovered that the cave entrance was several zhang high, almost like a small canyon. As soon as they entered the cave, they saw a lot of firewood piled up on both sides of the cave. The firewood was stacked neatly, like the haystacks and firewood stacks of a hard-working farmer in a mountain village. Lord Wolf was chattering non-stop. It was as if a person who had been depressed for a long time had finally found someone to talk to. It was no wonder they were asking about deities and Taoist techniques. Li Yunxin gave him a perfunctory reply and slowly realized that his excitement didn't seem fake. This Lord Wolf seemed to be going crazy when people came. It was as if he was some kind of large dog from his world. Seeing that Li Yunxin was paying attention to the firewood, he immediately said proudly that the demons in his cave abode didn't harm people and that he wanted to be a mountain god that protected the land. Therefore, they didn't eat raw food in the cave abode. They had to be cooked like humans. These firewood were gathered by the little demons in the autumn on the mountain. Now that it was snowing, they rushed into the cave. They said that some of the firewood was still buried in the snow and that it would be wet after a few days. They even asked Li Yunxin and Lu Gongzan if there were many demons outside like him, if there were any who wore clothes as gorgeous as his. After asking this question, he didn't wait for an answer and immediately asked the next question. There were occasional pauses, but he also used his huge, half-human, half-wolf head to stare at Lu Gongzan and Li Yunxin, looking very frightening. But when he did this, his mouth was half open, revealing his red tongue. It was like a dog staring curiously at its owner and asking for something. Looking at it like this, it didn't feel scary anymore. He and the old ghost were chattering away one after another. It sounded like they really wanted to know about the outside world. But in fact, it was more like they hadn't seen outsiders for a long time. Now they only cared about talking to their heart's content and didn't really care about any response. After a dozen breaths, the cave turned a corner. The four of them walked around this corner and suddenly saw a wide open space. It turned out that there was another world in this mountain. The cave led straight to a valley. Nature was indeed a work of art. This valley hidden in the mountains was more like a huge courtyard, with many trees and strange rocks forming natural partitions between them, forming many small courtyards. But this small was also relative to the entire valley. If compared to the outside world, a small courtyard was probably equivalent to a big house with 3 entrances. And because of this natural magnificence and boldness, the simple houses built with stones and straw in the courtyard also had a different feeling. After entering this valley, 3 little demons came to greet them. Different from this Lord Wolf, the 3 little demons were in human form. But seeing that there was no demon power overflowing, they should have just transformed into human form and didn't have any demon power. They needed a long time to absorb the spiritual power between heaven and earth or enjoy the incense offerings of the human world to slowly increase their realm. But there was almost no one here. Things like incense offerings were extravagant hopes for them. Because of this, Lord Wolf was probably so eager to obtain Tao techniques. Unfortunately, it wasn't clear if he knew that the spiritual chi between heaven and earth had been messed up by that Wei River Lord. Even if he wanted to cultivate after obtaining Tao techniques, he had to go to the grotto heavens and blessed lands. But according to Li Yunxin's observation along the way, although his cave abode had good scenery, it wasn't a good place with stable spiritual chi. The 3 little demons didn't look special. One was wearing black linen clothes, the other 2 were wearing animal skins. The one in black should be the little leader. Lord Wolf became serious when he saw them. He stopped talking and regained his dignified appearance. The 3 of you take good care of these 2 esteemed guests. Sendo young Master Li rest for a while. I will prepare a banquet to welcome you. After saying this, he didn't wait for Li Yunxin and Lu Gongzhan's reply. He turned around and strode into a dense forest, disappearing without a trace. The old demon hurriedly followed and shouted, Great King, I'm coming to help too." This Lord Wolf came and went like the wind, but people couldn't understand him. He suddenly left, but his continuous talking seemed to be echoing in their ears. The remaining 3 little demons looked at each other. After a while, the black-clothed little demon said, "2 esteemed guests, please follow me." As he spoke, his eyes wandered between Li Yunxin and Lu Gongzhan, like a child in the deep mountains who saw visitors from outside the mountains, extremely curious. The 2 demons behind him also followed him. They brought Li Yunxin and Lu Gongzhan into the house. The house looked like a house from the outside. But once he entered, he realized that it was extremely simple and crude. In fact, there was nothing but a stone bed. Li Yunxin and Lu Gongzhan looked around the house, then sat down on the stone bed. But the 3 little demons didn't leave. They stood side by side at the door of the stone house, forming a human door. They didn't seem to understand their lord's intention. Were they really esteemed guests, or prisoners? Since they weren't sure and were stupid, they simply stood at the door and watched. Li Yunxin was both annoyed and amused by his stupidity. But he was not in a hurry. He just wanted to see what Lord Wolf was going to do. Based on what he knew at the moment, he couldn't see through him. So he turned his palm and took out a small bronze mirror. As if he was playing around, he shone the bronze mirror on a small demon dressed in animal skin. Immediately, a wild chicken with its head shrunk back appeared on the mirror. Li Yunxin smiled and said to Lao Lu, "He's a cousin of Brother Pheasant." Then he looked at another little demon in animal skin. But there was nothing in the mirror. He frowned and looked carefully again, only to find that it was a grasshopper lying on the ground. So he smiled to Lu Gongzhan, "What scourge?" "Grasshopper." Lao Lu was stunned and also smiled. Although he didn't understand this sentence, he knew it should be a joke from Brother Xian's previous world. Well, he did call this kind of thing like this. He revealed the true identity of the 2 demons with just a few words. This made the 3 demons stare with their eyes wide open, as if it was incredible. Li Yunxin used the mirror to look at the leader in black again, but what appeared in the mirror was his original appearance. Li Yunxin and Lu Gongzhan were both surprised at the same time, and then they realized that this should be a ghost cultivator. Ghost cultivators were not common. It was not a big surprise that there were two ghost cultivators in this remote place. What was more curious was, the appearance of his ghost was exactly the same as it was now, even the clothes he wore were the same. Li Yunxin realized that the clothes he was wearing now should be the shroud he was wearing when he was buried. His face was a little pale and his eye sockets were dark. It could be said that he was a tuberculosis ghost or a newly dead body. After all, Li Yunxin had nothing to do, so he teased the demon, "Little brother, how did you die?" The leader was stunned for a while and then said, "Sick, died of illness." "Oh," Li Yunxin nodded, "it's a decent death. How has your king been recently?" The little leader was stunned again. "King? King, long live." Li Yunxin waved his hand, knowing that he wouldn't be able to get anything out of them. These three demons seemed to be wearing masks and the masks were full of respect, so it was hard to get anything out of them. At this time the old ghost rushed in again and said cheerfully, "Two honored guests, please come with me, Lord Wolf has prepared a banquet." The demons in this immortal's cave all seemed to be hotheads who didn't understand human emotions. Moreover, when he did things, he was burning with impatience and seemed to be in a rush. But this kind of different style of doing things was also what Li Yunxin wanted. As the saying goes, the more you do, the more mistakes you make. If Lord Wolf really had some tricks up his sleeves, he would probably reveal more important details very soon. So he and Lu Gongzan stood up, walked past the three demons and followed the old ghost. Along the way they made many turns, passing through many small courtyards that were separated. Because of this, they knew that there weren't many demons in this cave. Compared to the other demon kings that Li Yunxin had seen before, they were really shabby, but surprisingly clean. This clean didn't mean that there were no impurities, but rather that there were no fishy or foul smells. This meant that there was no blood food in the valley. Perhaps Lord Wolf was telling the truth. Their eating habits were already very similar to humans. Finally they arrived at a courtyard deep in the valley. A wooden door was set up at the entrance of the courtyard. Looking inside, they saw that the snow on the ground had already been swept clean and replaced with yellow soil. A stove was built in the middle of the courtyard, and on top of the stove was a large vat. The firewood below was burning brightly, and the vat was gurgling with heat and fragrance. Li Yunxin could also smell some wild vegetables and spices. He could barely be considered a glutton in his previous life, so he knew that this smell wasn't freshly cooked. The soup base in the vat must have been simmered for a long time, or perhaps the fire under the vat had never stopped burning, to be able to cook such a mellow fragrance. But he didn't know if this Lord Wolf was really 900 years old. Would the soup base in the vat also contain human flesh juice? Looking to the side, he saw a wooden stand on the side. There was a large gong hanging on the stand. A shifty-eyed little demon was standing in front of the gong with a wooden stick in his hand, not knowing what he was planning to do. Lord Wolf himself was sitting behind a stone table in the courtyard. There were two more tables on the left and right. Seeing Li Yunxin and Lu Gongzan, he shouted, "Two honored guests, please take a seat. I caught a deer a few days ago, it has been stewing for 4 hours, it's delicious. Old thing, come and look at the wine." The old ghost led the two to sit on the left and right of Lord Wolf. Then he picked up a large ladle. If Li Yunxin was not mistaken, he had seen this ladle before in old Lu's Dragon King temple. But it was used to scoop up dung. He went to the side of the vat, stirred the ladle vigorously in the vat and scooped something out. Seeing this scene, Li Yunxin couldn't bear to look at it, and for the first time he sympathized with a demon. He heard Lord Wolf say, "Sigh. I've made a fool of myself before. Actually, I don't have many people around here, now that I see two honored guests, I'm so happy that I have a lot to say." Li Yunxin looked at the suspicious wooden plate on the stone table in front of him, thought for a moment. Lord Wolf has been cultivating for 900 years. You've never gone outside to take a look? Lord Wolf laughed. Hee 900 years? That old thing said, "Young Master Li and Sendo don't know, us demons, this cultivation, hee. Who dares to claim to have cultivated for 100 years just because they have cultivated for 10 or 20 years? For those who have cultivated for more than 200 years, they claim to have cultivated for hundreds of years. After 500 years, they dare to claim to be a 1,000-year-old demon. My 900 years are only 360 years, it doesn't count, it doesn't count." Li Yunxin laughed. Lord Wolf is also familiar with the affairs of demons. Lord Wolf laughed again. "Not at all, not at all. My cave abode is deep in the mountains. I don't know when I attained Tao. As soon as I gained sentience I was in the mountains. When I was a wild beast I ran to many places, but after becoming a demon, I became even more timid. What if I ran around everywhere and barged into another demon king's territory and got killed? So at first I was very careful and didn't dare to go anywhere, only hiding in this valley. Later I slowly grew up and gained some courage, so I looked around. But this mountain range is vast. After walking for 10 days to half a month, I still see a sea of trees. After a few years, I felt that perhaps this world is full of towering trees, and lost interest. Then, occasionally, other demons passed by. From them I learned many things about this world, but I didn't know much. At this point, Lord Wolf finally stopped laughing. But the more I know, the more afraid I am. How would I dare to go out? He didn't know if what he said was true or false. But at least it was logical and reasonable. It sounded like a wild child who grew up in the mountains, afraid of the outside world, not daring to go out. It was reasonable. If not for the initial, "nice to meet you," and "hello." Hearing this, Li Yunxin and Lu Gongzan exchanged glances. Just as they were about to speak again, they suddenly heard a loud bang. It scared them so much that their livers trembled, and their souls almost left their bodies. Li Yunxin was so scared that he almost flipped out. Just as he was about to jump up and scold, he realized that the little demon who was standing next to the huge gong had used all his strength to knock the gong with the wooden stick in his hand. Then he heard the old demon who was scooping meat from the vat suddenly say solemnly, "Let's start the feast." Lord Wolf also sat up straight. He looked at Lu Laodao with a serious expression, then looked at Li Yunxin. "Sendo, young Master Li, this is the so-called the bell rings and cauldron eats. This is a noble etiquette from ancient times. Now, I use it to entertain distinguished guests like you." Seeing him like this, Li Yunxin could only sigh in his heart. He saw that the old demon scooped out a trembling, oily spoonful of fat, and poured it into the plate in front of Lu Gongzan, then Li Yunxin's plate. Then he took a sharp wooden stick and stabbed a huge heart from the vat, smashing it in front of Lord Wolf. This Lord Wolf narrowed his eyes. He stared at the heart, which was as big as his head, for a while, then said, "Both of you please enjoy. I won't be polite." Li Yunxin was about to speak, but Lord Wolf had already buried his head into the heart. All he heard was a series of barking and the sound of juices splashing. His heart was deflated by the food he had eaten. In less than 4 breaths' time, half of it was already in his stomach. Then Lord Wolf raised his head again, the short hair on his face soaked in juices. He licked his tongue and looked at Lu Gongzan, then looked at Li Yunxin, then asked curiously, "Why don't you two distinguished guests use it? Once you're full, we can go study the Dao technique." Li Yunxin and this Lord Wolf had only met for half an hour. However, half an hour ago he felt that he had found the right person. Now half an hour later he was not so sure. This Lord Wolf seemed like an idiot. Perhaps the "nice to meet you" and "hello" he mentioned were only heard from a passing demon. Perhaps that demon was related to the person Li Yunxin was looking for. He was disappointed. He decided not to waste any more time with this idiot. So he sighed and pushed the wooden plate in front of him away. Lord Wolf. But Lord Wolf buried his face in the heart again and finished it in 6 bites. Then he jumped up, stretched out his long tongue and licked the short hair on his cheeks clean. Then he narrowed his eyes and said in a deep voice, "I know what you two want to ask." His tone suddenly changed. "After sunset tonight, please come find me in this thatched cottage in my backyard." Chapter 577. Li Yunxin and Lu Gongzan's expressions froze. The disappointment in their hearts was immediately dispelled. This Lord Wolf is indeed strange. But without waiting for them to ask more, Lord Wolf said in a low voice, then immediately turned around and left, just like when he brought the two of them into the valley and said that he was going to prepare a banquet. Li Yunxin had somewhat adapted to his style of doing things. This guy, he had never seen such an eccentric person in his life. His interest in a matter would never last more than a quarter of an hour. Now that Lord Wolf had left, there was only the little demon who hit the gong and old ghost who scooped up the meat. The 4 of them looked at each other. After a while, the little demon threw the wooden stick in his hand to the ground, trotted to the side of the vat and peeked inside. Seeing that Li Yunxin and Lu Gongzan had no intention of reprimanding him, he reached out to scoop up the meat to eat. He looked like a retarded child. Li Yunxin looked up at the sky. It was already afternoon. But there was still some time before nightfall. The meat on the wooden plate in front of him was still steaming. Now it was cold. A layer of fat had condensed on the meat, and another layer had condensed on the plate. Li Yunxin couldn't eat, and neither could Lu Gongzan. He sighed, spread out his hands and asked Old Ghost, "So what do we do now?" Old Ghost was also stunned. Hearing Li Yunxin's question, he stammered, "This, he didn't seem to have any experience in receiving guests. After looking around for a while, he found a life-saving straw. The little demon in black with the two stupid demons also entered the courtyard and went straight to the vat. It seemed that the rule of this cave was that after Lord Wolf finished his meal, he could take whatever was left. Old Ghost hurriedly pointed at the little demon in black. Sendo. Young Masterly, you go ask him first. I'll go see Lord Wolf. After saying this, he slipped away. Perhaps he was still thinking about some Taoist magic, thinking that the Wolf Lord had already obtained it, so he left in a hurry. Li Yunxin watched as the three demons slowly approached the huge vat, scooping up the fatty meat and wolfing it down. She sighed. This is the first time I've seen such a bunch of stupid demons. As a Wolf Lord, he did things without thinking. The little demons were all stunned. The four little demons surrounded the vat and ate the meat. Not long after, another demon ran in from afar and squeezed to the side of the vat. Not knowing what they were whispering to each other, they quickly gathered together and continued wolfing down the food. Li Yunxin retracted his gaze. After thinking silently for a while, he said to Lu Gongzan, I feel that something is wrong. Lao Dao also thought for a moment. Brother Xian is worried that he has escaped? In that case, let's go after. I'm not talking about this. Li Yunxin thought as he took out the small jade bottle. He used his pinky to pick up some and slowly wiped it on his hands. It's not strange for a person to be rough. Many people are like this. But when these two contradictory qualities appear, there's usually another in me and another in you, carelessly forgetting to lock the door, but still remembering how much silver he brought and what he should buy. But this one is strange. At first, he's like a dog that hasn't seen anyone for a long time. He's stupid and naive, but he's cute. Sometimes, he'll be the same as before, suddenly turning into another person. It seems like these two qualities, two identities are separated. He slowly put the jade bottle back into his chest. He stared at the five little demons fighting for food for a while longer, then said softly, strange. I suspect, never mind. So there's no rush. Let's wait according to what he said. Maybe there'll be an unexpected reward. Lu Gongzan thought about what he said for a while, then suddenly lowered his voice. Does Brother Xen mean, there's someone else? Someone else. Someone was guiding Lord Wolf behind his back. That was why he was acting so strangely and contradictory. It was as if Lord Wolf's mind wasn't on the matter that Li Yunxin was concerned about. What he really cared about was Tao, and the joy of having guests. But when someone was guiding Lord Wolf, he had to display a certain behavior to attract people's attention. That was why this strange situation occurred. Lord Wolf's words and actions were like a flute tune. But every time he reached a paragraph, he would pause and add some abrupt notes. Li Yunxin slightly narrowed his eyes and nodded, I have this thought. But it might not be accurate. Saying this, he raised his hand and drew on the table, then knocked on it. Lu Gongzan finally realized that Li Yunxin had drawn a simple array on the table, so that no one could eavesdrop on their conversation. This move surprised him. Li Yunxin was a profound state cultivator. He was at the peak of transcendent state and had many Dharma treasures. But there were no powerful overlords in this cave abode. The two used their divine powers to do a simple search, but they didn't find anyone hiding. Their conversation shouldn't have been eavesdropped on. But now he was acting so cautiously. This meant that he was very concerned about this matter. If I were that person. Li Yunxin looked at the five little demons and said thoughtfully, I would carefully hide myself. Because I just came to this world. Maybe I know my mission or maybe I remember my past life. But this world is unfamiliar to me. I might be more proactive at first. Because I know that I have more knowledge than most people here. And I also have a mature and scientific cognitive system in my head. These are all advantages. As long as I know more about this world, it will become more advantageous. He paused and looked at Lu Gongzan. The old Taoist understood everything he said. There were many things that Li Yunxin didn't explain to Lu Gongzan. However, Lu Gongzan was a smart man, and when they were together, Li Yunxin rarely avoided some of his differences. Thus, the current Lu Taoist had a considerable understanding of certain things. He paused and continued to talk to himself, and then he will find something terrifying. The core rules of this world, the power system, are not in his knowledge and there are no rules to follow. Gods and monsters. He will find that gods and monsters really do exist. Regardless of whether his previous knowledge could explain this matter, if he was a smart person he should have realized how terrifying this matter was. In the face of a powerful force in a strange environment he was like an ant. In the Middle Ages of low-level martial arts worlds, death is a common thing. let alone in this world. An unlucky transmigrator. A mocking smile appeared on Li Yunxin's lips. Transmigrating to a place that is isolated from the world. Without a guide, without a cheat, what should I do? Lu Gongzan roughly understood what he meant. He thought for a while and continued so that Li Yunxin wouldn't feel bored. If it were me, I would first lie low. Or wait for a chance, or wait for someone to guide me. Li Yunxin said, if you lie low because you are afraid of this world and plan to wait for a chance, then you will carefully hide yourself. Because no matter where you are, powerless mutants are the easiest to kill. Lu Gongzan pondered for a while. But, if it is the latter and only the latter, know that there is a guide in this world, then you will lie low while carefully releasing some information that may attract the attention of the guide, but will not make the people in this world feel strange. Brother Xian, are you saying that the person you are looking for now knows what he is going to do, and knows that there will be someone to guide him? For now, yes, Li Yunxin said softly. Stupid monsters should not be the person I am looking for. Lord Wolf is just a mouthpiece, a scarecrow. The person I am looking for will use him to release information everywhere. Once danger comes, Lord Wolf will die first. Then that person will be warned and have enough time to respond. Lu Gongzan exhaled softly and cast his gaze at the 5 monsters beside the vat. Are you among them? Li Yunxin shook his head and pointed to the back. It is more likely to be that old ghost. But it is an educated person who wandered into this village. Because of coincidence, he has some relationship with my family. After death, he became a ghost cultivator, and now he happens to come to this Lord Wolf. And, since he is a ghost cultivator, his expression must have changed greatly. It is easy to explain that it does not match the old man's memory and temperament. He smiled. What a big suspicion. Lu Gongzan was about to get up. Then what are we waiting for? Li Yunxin pressed his shoulder. You forgot one thing. We don't know who is the person we are looking for. He also doesn't know whether we are possible enemies or his guide. Let's wait for sunset first, he said, and then confirm the identity of Lord Wolf. Thus, the 2 of them sat in the snow-covered courtyard from dusk until night fell. At first, the 5 little monsters in the courtyard were afraid of the 2 of them. But then they realized that the 2 of them were just sitting there, motionless and silent like clay statues. They slowly lost their vigilance. So they ate and drank as they fought, making the courtyard very noisy. The little monster who came last wanted to eat the deer's belly. He said that the meat was fat and fragrant, and he had to run around the mountains to gather information so he should enjoy it. The rest of the demons did not allow it. Because a piece of belly was fighting and rolling in the snow, it no longer looked like a fool. After listening to them, Li Yunxin and Lu Gongzan gradually learned more about the situation. In the past, there were some demons who passed by. But since they were passing by, their cultivation level was not high and they were stupid. They could know some things about the outside world by asking them, but they did not know which direction there was a big town and which way to go out. In Li Yunxin's eyes, the movement ability of the demons in the transcendent state was similar to that of a person who owned a car back then. The terrain of the mountains was rugged and the forest was vast. Just like what Lord Wolf said, it was not impossible to be trapped for hundreds of years. Until a year ago they finally got through. It turned out that there was a small road about 300 miles away from here, about 5 days' journey in the mountains. The small road was made by woodcutters and hunters. They ventured deep into the mountains in autumn, but in other seasons the road would be lost. If they walked along this road for another 2 days, they would reach a slightly bigger village with about 100 people. From this village, it would take another 8 or 9 days to reach the nearest county. Therefore, about a year ago, Lord Wolf finally witnessed the prosperity of the human world with his own eyes. The robe he was wearing was also obtained at that time. Now that he had found signs of human habitation, he had more routes to take. The little monsters were sent out to gather information, but it was a coincidence. A few days ago, they found out what happened in the Tong Tian swamp of the Yi country. As a result, such a secluded cave residence had become one of the first forces to know about the little demon protection. After listening to this, after another quarter of an hour, the sun finally set. The fire under the vat in the courtyard was still burning. The 5 little monsters had eaten and drunk their fill. They lazily lay down by the fire to keep warm, and to ensure that the fire would not go out. But since there was heat, the frozen soil and snow on the ground melted, and they were covered with mud. Only the little leader in black was a little smarter. He sat a little further away from them. He stared at Li Yunxin and Lu Gongzan, as if he was very concerned about the responsibility his master had given him. After a while, Old Ghost came in from the back of the courtyard and looked around. Young Master Li. He lowered his voice and said, His Majesty wants you to go, only you. After a pause, he added on his own, but bring the Taoist book. Li Yunxin stood up and said to Lu Gongzan, You keep an eye on them. He looked at Old Ghost as he said this, Don't let them out of this courtyard before I come back. Then he got up and walked back. The power of a mysterious realm demon was hard for these little monsters to imagine. In fact, during the time he stayed in this courtyard, his divine sense had already explored the general structure of this valley. There were 48 small valleys and a big valley. Not all of them could accommodate them. Some were full of strange rocks, some were deep crevices, and some were natural springs. Lord Wolfgar and the other demons created about 13 of them. The one they were enjoying the banquet in was the second largest. The largest one was 4 valleys away from this one. There seemed to be some kind of building inside. He didn't use any divine ability. He just used the ability of the dragons to slowly inflate his breath with his mouth and nose, and then perceived what it looked like in the distance from the changes in the airflow and clouds, so he didn't know what the building was. But Lord Wolf was now in that building. In fact, he had been there since the afternoon. But he had been sleeping inside. He had solemnly and seriously left a suspenseful sentence for Li Yunxin and Lu Gongzan, but in the blink of an eye, he fell asleep as if nothing had happened. He only woke up when night fell. Now, when Li Yunxin passed through the small valleys and turned around a cluster of rocks to see the scene in the distance, he found that Lord Wolf had become solemn again. He was sitting upright in a thatched hut. The floor was made of roughly chopped wooden planks. For huge log pillars supported the roof. The roof was covered with thatch, but it was covered by snow, only the edge was exposed. The moon had not yet risen. In fact, even if it did, the valley would not be very bright, because tonight was the last quarter moon. In the faint starlight, Li Yunxin saw Lord Wolf's eyes were wide open, flashing a faint green light. He stopped at the entrance of the valley. He said in a low voice, I'm here. What does Lord Wolf want to say? About 3 breaths later, Lord Wolf coughed dryly, Oh. You should go back. Li Yunxin was stunned. What? Lord Wolf said seriously, If I tell you to go back, then go back. Why are you asking so many questions? Li Yunxin was a little confused, so he slowly frowned and stared at Lord Wolf for a while. Lord Wolf should not be able to see through his cultivation level. However, the vague pressure and aura on his body suddenly leaked out at this moment. Lord Wolf blinked his eyes in confusion. A fleeting look of panic appeared on his face. Just as he was about to speak again, Li Yunxin seemed to have thought of something and smiled, Okay. He turned around and walked out of the valley. After about 3 steps, he heard Lord Wolf call him, Young Master Li, please go back. Li Yunxin did not show any displeasure. He turned around and walked back. This time he stopped at the entrance of the valley. Seeing Lord Wolf, he paused and said, You should go back. Li Yunxin turned around again. After another 3 steps, he heard Lord Wolf call him, Young Master Li, please go back. He turned around for the second time. But this time he did not stop at the entrance of the valley. Instead, he walked unhurriedly until he reached the thatched hut. Lord Wolf did not ask him to go back. However, the expression on his face changed. His surprise was slowly revealed. The wolf demon's eyes became rounder. He looked at Li Yunxin as if he was looking at a treasure. You? 3 visits to the thatched hut, Li Yunxin said meaningfully, but Lord Wolf's action is really too formalistic. But perhaps Lord Wolf wants to use this to distinguish whether I am the person you are looking for. Am I right? Lord Wolf only cared about nodding for a moment. His serious and calm appearance was completely gone. Li Yunxin smiled again. What else do you want to say to me, Lord Wolf? The wolf demon was stunned for a while, as if the huge surprise made him speechless for a moment. Then he hurriedly said, Yes. I have a question for young Master Li. Go ahead. Lord Wolf no longer knelt down like a human. Instead, he jumped down and stared at Li Yunxin expectantly. Since I was born to be the demon king of the world, why do I still need to learn Taoist techniques? Li Yunxin was silent for a while. He carefully looked at Lord Wolf. Based on his ability to read people, he knew that Lord Wolf was asking the question from the bottom of his heart. So he said, Because Taoist techniques are passed down by the Deva, they are extremely powerful. You have the strong body of a demon. If you learn Taoist techniques, won't you be able to dominate the world? This answer seemed to make Lord Wolf very satisfied. His eyes became rounder. Young Master Li, I have another question. Go ahead. After becoming the demon king, can I be like the emperor in the human world, having many concubines? Li Yunxin thought for a while, then simply replied with 2 words, yes. Then he fell silent. He was now in this valley in front of the thatched cottage. In front of him, there was a wolf demon chattering on and on about something, and he was also answering casually. But at this moment his mind suddenly went back to a few days ago. That day in Cloud Mountain, he met a person who called himself Grandmaster D. Grandmaster D took him to the secret chamber and showed a special interest in him, just like how he was interested in Lord Wolf just a few seconds ago. Then he asked Grandmaster D 2 questions trying to clear up the doubts in his heart, and at the same time to find out something, just like Lord Wolf asked him 2 questions. But after those 2 questions, Grandmaster D quickly lost interest in him, and even planned to kill him casually. At that time he was puzzled. He thought that his questions were watertight and could be interpreted in many ways, so he would definitely not reveal any flaws. Now he understood. In Grandmaster D's eyes, his appearance was no different from Lord Wolf's in his eyes. Lord Wolf's 2 questions made Li Yunxin finally confirm that he was not that person. The person he was looking for was someone else, and Lord Wolf was indeed just a scarecrow. Because no matter how bold and comprehensive Lord Wolf's idea was, it was still within the framework of this world. He asked if he could be a monster king and asked if he could have many concubines. The more questions he asked, the more he would give himself away. There was no need for any verification. Li Yunxin saw through him. Lord Wolf was not a traveler. Because of the information asymmetry, his so-called cleverness was like a child's play in Li Yunxin's eyes. At that time, in the secret chamber on Cloud Mountain, in Grandmaster D's eyes, he must have been as stupid as this. But the question was, what was the problem? Who was the person that Grandmaster D and Black by Yanjun were looking for? Until now there was still no answer. But at least there was a glimmer of hope. Li Yunxin sighed, looked up at Lord Wolf and interrupted him. The things you said, the nice to meet you, hello, 3 visits to the thatched cottage tricks, who taught you these? Chapter 578. Lord Wolf was talking non-stop. He said things like, I knew the mandate of heaven and young Master Li would come. Now that he heard Li Yunxin's question, his smile froze on his face. He frowned and shook his ears. What? I'm asking you. You said nice to meet you, and nice to meet you. And about meeting me 3 times in this hut tonight, who told you? Who taught you to do that? Li Yunxin repeated patiently. Was it that old ghost? Lord Wolf frowned. His nose, which was shorter than a wolf's but longer than a human's, wrinkled fiercely. He even showed his canine teeth and said in a low voice, What are you talking about? No one taught me, I am the son of heaven, I was born knowing. At this time he finally realized that something was wrong. Who are you people? Who sent you? Li Yunxin looked at him. Stupid dog. You were used, I'll capture you first. Lord Wolf suddenly became furious. Low-level demons like him were only at the transcendent state. It was the most convenient to show his true form during a fight. Lord Wolf planned to do the same. But before he showed his true form, he did one more thing than the other demons that Li Yunxin had seen. He first tore off the green robe and threw it on the ground. With an angry roar, he suddenly transformed into a giant wolf that was 10 feet tall. So that person also told you that someone might come looking for you. Li Yunxin stood in front of the giant wolf and smiled. I guessed right. As soon as he finished speaking, the giant wolf opened its mouth and bit down. That mouth could swallow him whole. But what happened next was no surprise. With a raise of his hand, he slammed the wolf head into the ground with a loud bang, causing a cloud of snow and mist to fly everywhere. The giant wolf was stunned for a moment. After a while, it remembered to kick its 4 legs. In the blink of an eye, it dug 4 deep holes in the ground. But compared to Li Yunxin, its strength was like an ant to an elephant. His head was firmly nailed, unable to move at all. He couldn't even speak and could only let out a low whimper from his throat. Li Yunxin pressed his head like he was pressing the head of an obedient puppy. She looked at him with pity. I understand. That person might have always told you that you were the savior of the world, that you were favored by the heavens. Today you suddenly realized that something was wrong, so you became anxious. But there's nothing we can do about it. Reality is reality. The reality now is that if you don't tell the truth, not only will you lose your dream, you might even lose your life. At this moment he heard footsteps. Lord Wolf's low howl must have alerted the people outside. The one who rushed in first was the leader of the small monsters in black. Behind him were 4 small monsters covered in mud. They looked confused and did not know what was going on. When they saw the state of their Lord Wolf, they were even more confused. The black-clothed leader was more quick-witted. After staring blankly for a while, he finally asked in a trembling voice, Great King, did something happen? What orders does the Great King have? But Lord Wolf was pressed down by Li Yunxin, so he couldn't speak. He could only whimper, which was really embarrassing. Hearing this, the leader immediately said, if the Great King doesn't have any orders, we'll leave first. Hearing this, Lord Wolf's forelegs moved even more violently. A thick tail swept the snow on the ground into the air. Then he remembered that his real body was pressed down, and he could still transform into a human. He twisted his body and suddenly shrunk into a furry werewolf. Seeing that he gave in, Li Yunxin stopped. Seeing Lord Wolf sitting on the ground, panting, his eyes wide open. You really are. He didn't say this to Li Yunxin, he looked outside. The Great King was really here. Li Yunxin immediately turned his head to look in the direction of Lord Wolf's gaze. He saw Old Ghost also rushing in, his face full of fear and surprise. Hearing Lord Wolf's words, the black-clothed leader immediately jumped up and pointed at Old Ghost. It's you. Take him down, take him down, take him down. At this time Lu Gongzan also came in. But he knew that the demons here weren't a match for him and Li Yunxin, so he wasn't in a hurry. He could only make a bunch of people stay right under his nose, waiting for Brother Xian's order before he would take them away. But at this time something happened. When the 4 demons saw their master being pressed down by Li Yunxin, they knew that he wasn't someone to be trifled with. So they pretended to be friendly and wanted to slip away. But at this time the leader said to take down Old Ghost. This Old Ghost had been with them for a long time, so they knew that there was nothing to be afraid of. Since the Great King had spoken, they naturally had to perform well. Thus, the 5 demons scrambled to be the first to pounce on the Old Ghost, while the latter was still staring with his eyes wide open. Only when he saw the 5 demons pouncing on him with bared fangs and brandished claws did he let out a scream, turned around and fled. Lu Gongzan frowned slightly, raised his hand and shot out a talisman to restrain Old Ghost. Unexpectedly, one of the demons tilted his body and was hit by the talisman. Like a wooden stake, he fell straight to the ground. Lu Gongzan wasn't in a hurry. He flicked his other finger and shot out a second talisman. This time they could see it clearly. The leader of the black-clothed group pushed another small demon to receive the talisman. He did this twice in a row as if he knew that he couldn't hide it. In a moment of desperation, he abandoned his body and rushed towards Lu Gongzan, shouting, Old thing, you've treated me well, no matter what you do today, leave quickly. Lu Gongzan didn't care about this kind of trick. He snorted coldly, then threw the leader far away to the side. Then he pointed at Old Ghost. The ghost cultivator's body, which had already turned into a faint human figure, suddenly froze, as if the smoke had condensed into a substance in an instant. Then he fell to the ground with a stiff body. However, it seemed that Old Ghost had already done something at this moment. In Li Yunxin's extremely sharp perception, something under the ground first shook. The source of the tremor should be under the thatched cottage. Then in an instant, it suddenly spread in all directions, causing an even more violent tremor, and an even more terrifying energy burst out. Boom! Half of the valley was lifted into the sky. A huge amount of soil and sand splashed up like a wave, and the Wolf Lord, who had turned into a human figure, was also caught in it. Although Li Yunxin was standing a bit further away, he was also affected. At this moment, 2 thoughts flashed through his mind. Sure enough, he found the right place. Because this explosion wasn't spiritual power or demon power. He smelled a familiar yet strange smell amidst the roar and smoke. In his previous world, the smell of firecrackers being set off during the New Year's festival. This was a man-made explosion. Man-made, not man-made. If it was any other time, under any other circumstances, Li Yunxin would definitely be able to save Lord Wolf. But this explosion today shocked him. When he was in the city of Wei, he taught someone the black powder technique. That person received the formula of the black powder like it was a treasure, and even the Yu family valued it very much. This meant that this thing hadn't appeared in this world yet. But the explosion in the valley today, the power was far from what the black powder could achieve. It should be some kind of better explosive, so good that even Li Yunxin didn't know what it was. And because of this shock, Lord Wolf's life was lost. When the smoke slightly dispersed and the loud noise gradually subsided, Lord Wolf's body fell back to the ground, into 3 pieces. His face was unrecognizable and his vitality was cut off. At this time, Li Yunxin finally reacted. He shook the iron chain in his hand and was about to capture Lord Wolf's soul. But he didn't know if it was because of the energy from the explosion, the shockwave, or something else that affected the soul. That demon's soul was no longer in the valley. He didn't know where it was blown to. Now he looked to his side. He saw that Lu Gongzan was also dumbfounded. Actually, Lord Wolf was one of the most likable demons. He didn't eat humans but cooked food and wanted to be a mountain god. He even took off his clothes before the battle, probably because he couldn't bear to part with the silk robe. The two of them came to the valley full of confidence. They thought that they were the ones who had the power to decide life and death in this cave. If they didn't die, no one would be able to do anything. That was why they calmly watched Lord Wolf create trouble, not in a hurry. Now that they had a clue, they should have restrained him with a smile, and then interrogated him in detail. If there was an opportunity and this Lord Wolf was tactful, maybe he could make him a demon general. Who would have thought that the current situation, what seemed like a comedy story, suddenly turned into a murder mystery? It was as if the day had suddenly turned into a dark night. Lu Gongzan didn't expect this turn of events, and the little demons were even more at a loss. If they didn't go out to chase after the old ghost, they would probably be dead as well. Finally, when all the dirt and stones fell from the sky like raindrops, Lu Laodao looked at Li Yunxin. Brother Xen. Li Yunxin shook his body and the dirt on his shoulders rolled off. He glanced at Lord Wolf's corpse, walked to the side of the leader in black who was thrown to the side by Lu Gongzan, picked him up and stared at him. "What the hell are you doing?" At this time the little demon was also stunned. Like a corpse, he was shaken by Li Yunxin twice and then he suddenly screamed, "Kill that old thing! Avenge the king!" When he shouted this sentence, his hatred was about to burst, and he didn't care about Li Yunxin's even more terrifying expression. But after this shout he started to cry again. "It's all because of you two jinxes, scourges. You killed my king. I killed my king. Kill that old thing. My king treated you well, how dare you?" This time no one listened to him. The rest of the little demons were trembling in fear, and they didn't have the mood to kill that old thing. Looking at the leader's appearance, maybe he had a secret in the past. He was secretly on good terms with the old ghost. Now, although he didn't know what the old ghost had done to anger his king, he was actually hot-blooded and wanted to let him go. But now he found out that his king was dead, and he realized that the old ghost he wanted to protect was different from him, and he regretted it very much. Li Yunxin stared at him for a while and then threw him to the ground. Then he turned to stare at the old ghost. "Watch him for me." He said this coldly to Lu Gongzan, and then paced 2 steps in exasperation, muttering to himself, "Such a good thing, such a good thing." Really? Saying this, he glared at the old ghost. He looked like he couldn't wait to kill him right here and now. However, because the other party was indeed an important person, he couldn't do it. Lu Gongzan didn't say anything. But his expression was also very ugly. He strode over and placed several restrictions on the old ghost's body and then said, "Brother Xen, what about these?" Li Yunxin waved his hand angrily. "What's the use of keeping these idiots? Get lost." It was unclear whether this "get lost" was directed at Lu Gongzan or the little demons. Lu Gongzan tacitly agreed that it was the latter. He didn't ask any more and with a livid face, he took back the talisman on one of the little demons. He also said in a deep voice, "Get lost." At this moment, the 4 demon soldiers seemed to wake up from a dream. Although they still didn't know what happened, since their king was already dead, how could they dare to stay here? They immediately ran away in fear. Li Yunxin turned around and found that the leader in black was still on the ground. It took him a long time to get up, standing shakily, looking at the corpse of the wolf lord on the ground. His face unexpectedly had a sorrowful expression like a human. He frowned. "Get lost." The leader paused, suddenly knelt on the ground, kowtowed 3 times to the corpse of the wolf lord and also ran away. And so, after a dozen breaths, in this valley there were only Li Yunxin, Lu Gongzan and the old ghost. Lao Dao stood beside the old ghost, watching Li Yunxin with his hands behind his back, staring blankly in the direction of the valley entrance. For a quarter of an hour he didn't say a word. As if it was the first time he suffered such a blow, so he lost his composure. Lao Dao thought for a while, finally sighed and said in a low voice, "Brother X and I." Only then did Li Yunxin turn his face. As soon as Lu Gongzan saw his appearance he was stunned. Because Li Yunxin's face now didn't have an angry or frustrated expression. On the contrary, there was a smile. This smile he saw when Li Yunxin planned to deal with the city of Wei prefectural magistrate Li Yaoxi, and also when he dealt with Yunzi. It was a kind of complacent, slightly evil smile. Lu Gongzan's heart suddenly fell into his stomach, and he suddenly felt light. He blinked. "Brother Xin?" Li Yunxin tilted his head. "Let's go. Go catch fish." Lao Dao was stunned again. Then he looked at the old ghost beside him. Then this? It's also a scarecrow. Li Yunxin snorted. If I hadn't done this kind of thing before, I would have almost been fooled. Walking in the mountains at night was a very dangerous thing. Many things that were insignificant during the day could be fatal. For example, a stone could make people fall off a cliff. A sharp branch could also poke people's eyes. But these problems didn't exist for Li Yunxin and Lu Gongzan. The two of them exited Lord Wolf's cave, and in the time it took to say 3 or 4 sentences, they had already walked the path that the person they were looking for had taken nearly a quarter of an hour to complete. They walked to a small Colonel. Li Yunxin casually chopped a bush in front of him and sighed, "You now remind me of my past. If a demon were to casually throw them away, they would fall to the ground and be heavily injured. So how did you survive all these years with the fiendish demons?" The person who heard his words was now sitting against an old tree. His breathing was rapid and his brows were tightly knitted. It seemed that he had indeed suffered serious internal injuries. Chapter 579. Lu Gongzan rubbed his fingers behind Li Yunxin's back. A soft light shone on the face of the black-clothed leader in the cave. At this time, looking at his face, he finally felt that it was not so ordinary. His face was pale, but his expression became lively. He was no longer dull. His eyes looked especially black in the light. He covered his chest with one hand and supported himself on the ground with the other. White air was coming out of his mouth and his chest was making ho-ho sounds. Maybe some bone was broken. He looked at Li Yunxin and Lu Gongzan without saying anything. The 3 pairs of eyes looked at each other for a while. Li Yunxin said, "When I let you go, you went back to the other courtyard first. You dug out some gold and silver, 2 sets of clothes and some ointment for bruises. Then you left. I can see these things with talismans. You must be a human to be able to use these things. What I saw in the demon-revealing mirror wasn't your soul, but your real body. Am I right?" The black-clothed leader still didn't say anything. But in the end he slowly put his hand into his robe and took out some gold and silver. He threw them on the ground. The gold and silver disappeared into the snow. "I only have this much money on me," he said. Listening to him now, he was a completely different person. Before, when he was disguised as a demon, he purposely raised his voice, which sounded sharp and stupid. Now his voice was low and calm, which was pleasant to the ear. His face also had some contours because of the firelight. Li Yunxin frowned and looked at him carefully. He felt that he could be the main character with this appearance. Although he wasn't good-looking, he wasn't ugly either. Li Yunxin smiled. "You and I both know that I didn't look for you for gold and silver." The man coughed twice in a low voice. The blood splattered on the white snow like falling petals in spring. "Then why?" "I'm just a pitiful person who took refuge in the Wolf Lord's cave. If you want to seek revenge, look for him, not me." Li Yunxin was silent. It was a stalemate. Both he and the black-clothed man knew something. He knew that the black-clothed man might be the real crown prince. Since he was the real crown prince, he knew many things that he didn't know. Perhaps he knew as much as Grandpa D. He wanted to get some information from the man in black, so he had to pretend to be the guide. However, the problem was that he had learned his lesson from his confrontation with Grandpa D on Yunshan Mountain. He did not dare to open his mouth and ask any more questions. For example, if he casually asked, "How long have you been waiting here?" What if the real guide knew when the real prince would arrive? He could only avoid the important and dwell on the trivial. He carefully played around the edges and asked this person to reveal some useful information. However, this person wasn't stupid. He hid in Lord Wolf's cave and became the leader of the demons in his human form. It was also as if he was trying to brainwash Lord Wolf, making him believe that he was the one, and saying all sorts of nonsense as a secret signal. Therefore, once someone like Li Yunxin came looking for him, his attention would be drawn to Lord Wolf. And this person was watching in the dark. Previously, when Li Yunxin and Lu Gongzan were led to the courtyard to rest, this black-clothed man and the other 2 demons stood straight at the door. They were watching him and Lu Gongzan. This guy was cautious but bold. When Lord Wolf realized that something was wrong and was about to give him up, he activated the trap that he had set up earlier and killed Lord Wolf without saying anything. He acted out another bitter drama. When Li Yunxin asked him to leave, he did the finishing work calmly. He kowtowed to the remains of Lord Wolf. If it was someone else, they wouldn't have thought that the person they were looking for was swaggering in front of them and standing up for them everywhere. Fortunately, Li Yunxin often did this kind of thing. When he first met the Lord Dongting in the Purple Myrtle Palace of the Lord Dongting Mountain, Didn't he use this kind of method to frame the cultivator of the Xianmen sect? When two drama queens competed, the winner or loser depended on the details. This person's mind might not lose to Li Yunxin's, but the disadvantage was that he didn't have a magical power. Some things required a smart ordinary person to reason, investigate and speculate to get a rough conclusion. But for people like Li Yunxin, just like what he did after he left and where he was now, he only needed a magical power to know. Let's say something fair. This guy was acting a little too hard. Maybe it was because they hadn't seen each other for a long time and were unfamiliar with each other. But at this moment this person must also know that Li Yunxin knew something about him. However, since he had made Lord Wolf a target, it meant that he knew that there might be danger lurking in the shadows. Now that Li Yunxin and Lu Gongzan showed up, he should find out whether they were guides or dangerous people. Now that he was seriously injured, he still pretended to be confused. Just like Li Yunxin, he didn't talk about the main point. He was also waiting for the other party to provide useful information first. After a moment of silence, Li Yunxin put his hand into his pocket, took out a jade bottle and threw it on the man's leg. Eat this first. I suspect that your rib fracture caused pulmonary edema. He looked at the man in black and said the words, pulmonary edema, softly but clearly. But you also know that I couldn't do anything at that time. After saying this, he raised a finger and pointed it to the sky. In fact, he was risking it again by uttering a word which he considered to be of no consequence, and which did not exist in this world, and by making an ambiguous suggestion. But this couldn't be helped. He couldn't observe slowly and make a long-term plan. In this situation of information asymmetry, the longer he delayed, the easier it was to give himself away. The wisest thing to do was to take a risk and quickly find an entry point. Then he would get enough information before the other party noticed that something was wrong, and he would have more opportunities to explain perfunctorily. If he succeeded, he could slowly pry the other party's mouth open. If he failed, he had to kill him immediately without hesitation. However, the other party should have thought of this possibility. The man in black was stunned. According to Li Yunxin's sharp eyes, this expression was natural. But even so, there were many explanations. For example, I didn't expect that I would save him, or, I didn't expect that I was not the guide. Then he silently picked up the jade bottle and opened the lid. Without hesitation, without even smelling it, he directly poured the contents of the bottle into his mouth and swallowed it naturally. After 2 breaths, the effect of the medicine was immediate. Vitality reappeared in his body. He was a little surprised and straightened his body, no longer feeling any pain. So he slowly stood up and looked at Li Yunxin. Finally he said, "What happened?" When he said this, he raised his hand and pointed to the sky just like Li Yunxin. There were 2 possibilities. One was that Li Yunxin asked a stupid question that he shouldn't have asked. He noticed something was wrong, but his expression didn't change. He tried to make Li Yunxin say more stupid things to confirm his speculation. The second possibility was that Li Yunxin's bet was right. The people from Moonenju and Black Baiyanjun were all paying close attention to him, treating him as the person in front of them. The Freemasons' elders in the Heavenly Cloud Mountain also knew about this. But Moonenju and the Freemasons were opposing forces. This meant that this person must belong to one side. Based on the various details he knew so far, the possibility of him belonging to Moonenju was higher. Then he could understand that pointing to the sky meant that the Freemasons were paying attention to them. But he still couldn't be completely sure. Now everything was in a chain of suspicion. Every sentence could have an opposite interpretation. The best result was to carefully sum up the details from each other's truth or lies, and then use these details to piece together the facts closest to the truth. Li Yunxin planned to probe like this for at least 1 night. If he still couldn't get any useful information after 1 night, and he still couldn't control this person, he was a mortal after all. With the demon's divine abilities and the professional skills from Li Yunxin's previous life, he should be able to easily get what was in his head. But that way this person would have to die. If he spared his life, he might be able to dig out more things this person didn't even know about in the future. When he asked what happened, Li Yunxin decided to take another risk. He would use the great calamity that Grandmaster D had mentioned to send him away. But just as he was about to speak, the man in black exhaled softly and said, "Is your relationship so tense now? Looks like I was right to be more careful. Was the thunderstorm coming for me?" This time, it was Li Yunxin's turn to be dumbfounded. He had thought about what he would do if he were in the same situation as the man in black. He would pretend to trust him and then lead him to reveal more information. But now this person in front of him had said 3 sentences in a row, and all of them contained very clear information. Is your relationship so tense now? This meant that Li Yunxin's speculation was right. They were indeed two hostile forces. However, it seemed that there wasn't much hatred between them in the past, so he used the word, now. The information revealed by this sentence was exactly the same as what Li Yunxin had observed. Although the Freemasonry and Mu Nanju coexisted, they didn't fight as fiercely as Dao Tong and the demons. There was a covert, limited, low-intensity war going on between them. It was said that Black Bai Yanjun of Sun Luo Temple used to be a celestial, or had a deep relationship with a celestial. Now, the two Yama kings had a deep relationship with Mu Nanju. This also confirmed what the man in black had said. Mu Nanju and the Freemasonry had some kind of close relationship in the past. Looks like I was right to be more careful. The thunderstorm coming for me meant that he was prepared for the deterioration of their relationship. That was why he hid and did not dare to wander around in this world. In the past, Li Yunxin was like a child who walked into a dark forest full of ferocious beasts. He didn't know how dangerous it was until he experienced many life and death situations later on. Now he slowly realized how lucky he was to survive. But this person knew the dangers of the forest from the beginning, so he hid for so long and so deep. These 3 sentences did not seem to be a test. It seemed that after Li Yunxin threw him the jade bottle and cured his injury, he had won this person's trust. This was the strange thing. What was it that won this guy's trust in that instant? Or could it be that the danger in his eyes and the threat from the sky were different from what Li Yunxin thought? In that case, Li Yunxin exhaled lightly and said a few bolder words, "So you should have heard about the little demon protection." Then he looked at him seriously, "But don't rush. First tell me, how did you live in the past? Also, what should I call you now?" He paused for a moment. "You should know that before we mistook that person for you." The information conveyed by the man in black aroused Li Yunxin's irrepressible curiosity. He decided to take the risk again. Perhaps it was not a rational approach, but there was no better way. A strange light appeared in the man in black's eyes. "How?" Li Yunxin shook his head calmly. "Things are complicated. Otherwise I wouldn't have found you only now." The man in black suddenly smiled. "I understand. You are suspecting that I am also an imposter. But it is understandable." Li Yunxin's heart skipped a beat. Understandable? What does it mean? Does it mean that this kind of situation is really possible? But then the man in black looked around. "Then let's talk here. Here's site, build another fire. It is very similar to that side." That side. Li Yunxin repeated this word in his heart and casually flicked the ground. A ball of flame appeared out of thin air and started burning on the snowy ground. The snow was quickly burned, revealing the weeds underneath. Li Yunxin said, "This is boring. Old Lu, please go and collect some firewood, it is more interesting." The two had only exchanged a few words before. In fact, the time was very short. During this time, Lu Gongzan kept a straight face, not letting any emotion show on his face. Now that he heard Brother Xian ask him to collect firewood, he realized that if he stayed any longer, he might ruin the plan. Perhaps there would be a fierce confrontation. If he was surprised or frightened, it might ruin the plan. Therefore, he responded in a low voice without changing his expression, turned around and disappeared into the forest. In this small valley, only Li Yunxin and the man in black were left. The two stood around a flame floating in the air. Their faces were gloomy because of the fire. If a mortal passed by and saw this scene, he would definitely be scared sick. After the time of 3 breaths, when the sound of Lu Gongzan's footsteps disappeared in the distance, the man in black said, "Here, call me Xie Sheng." Li Yunxin nodded. "Okay, Xie Sheng. Please speak." Xie Sheng narrowed his eyes and looked at Li Yunxin for a while, then said, "Say something you can understand first." Because of this sentence, Li Yunxin was stunned again. Then he realized that things had gone wrong. This man who called himself Xie Sheng did not fully trust him. Or rather, he did not successfully play the role he wanted to be. Li Yunxin wanted Xie Sheng to think that he was a guide who understood everything. But after a few words just now, the other party realized that he was not. But because of some other reasons, perhaps he saw him as an envoy. Perhaps a role like the Freemasonry wandering souls. He knew some things but not the core content. That was why he said, "Say something you can understand first." Li Yunxin suddenly understood Xie Sheng's current attitude. It was probably the same as when he first came to this world, cautious, but also with a certain sense of superiority. Because in his eyes, even the emperor was nothing more than an ignorant and backward fellow. But he did not feel disappointed. Instead, he felt a little relieved. In the end he had achieved what he wanted before. He had hidden himself in a certain way to gain the other party's trust and obtain more information, even if this trust was limited and temporary. Speaking of which, I was unlucky. When I came, the village was hit by a beast disaster. Xiexing sat back in his previous position and slowly spoke. As he spoke, he looked at Li Yunxin as if he was also studying his expression. My village is actually not far from your village, 3 days' journey. It was early spring that year. The wolves had no food to eat, so they came to the village to eat people. The small village, a dozen families, almost all died. The father and mother of the original owner of my body also died at that time. At that time he was about 3 or 4 years old. Li Yunxin blinked her eyes. He knew about this. Xiexing said that they were attacked by the wolves. Li Chunfeng once told him that in the year he was born, a village 3 days' journey away from his village was hit by a wolf disaster. At that time he and Shangguanyu planned to settle there. But when they got there they only saw corpses all over the ground, so they went elsewhere. Then they arrived at the place where they later lived in seclusion. This meant that this Xiexing was actually 4 years older than he was. And he had possessed the body of a native of this world. Li Yunxin thought for a moment and said, No wonder, we couldn't find you. Xiexing smiled again. But the original owner of this body was taken back by a female wolf. It's very strange. Most of the legendary wolf children were still in their infancy. It's very rare for a 3 or 4-year-old child to be adopted by a wolf pack. And then I survived. I won't go into details about what happened in between. Probably because I didn't understand the situation around me. I tried to go out several times. But I couldn't. My body was too weak and I was malnourished since childhood. I didn't dare to get sick or get hurt. You should understand. Li Yunxin nodded. Of course he understood. He transmigrated into the body of a child from a poor mountain family, and his body was thin and weak since childhood. Then he was trapped in the deep mountains and could only rely on the wolf for survival. He could die from a cold, a cut on his leg, a parasitic infection, and being targeted by a large beast could also die. Not to mention getting out of the mountains and finding people. Just the fact that he actually survived was already the template of a legendary protagonist. Another year later, I met a monster. This is the first time I saw such a thing. Xiexing shook his head and sighed. It's really different here. It's really different here. Li Yunxin remembered this sentence. Did it mean that he had lived here in this world before? Or that someone he knew had lived here before? The tone of this sentence was like a person from a big city returning to his hometown in the countryside. There was a strange sense of mystery. Chapter 580. When he paused, Li Yunxin said softly, Was the monster you met Lord Wolf? Lord Wolf? No. Xiexing didn't look at Li Yunxin but looked at the flame, but it was also a wolf demon. It was a wolf demon that had just become a demon. It was temperamental. He found me in the mountain and brought me back for fun. After torturing me, he threw me aside and soon forgot about me. He paused and straightened his body, pointing at the cave of Lord Wolf. At that time, the wolf demon's lair was on the mountain, above the valley. Look at that mountain. Li Yunxin looked in the direction he pointed. Although the moonlight tonight was not good, the view was clear because of the snow on the mountain. So he saw the mountain next to Lord Wolf's cave. It was very high and steep. It was covered by lush vegetation like a fairyland. There were many mountains like this here. Layers of mountains separated this place from the bustling city of Wei Little Rock Canyon and the capital. It was like two completely different worlds. I was thrown on the cliff halfway up the mountain. There was only a small path, but it had to pass through the demon's lair. Originally he said that he wanted to use it as a prison, but he forgot about it after throwing me in. After that, he recruited a few demons that had just become human. They didn't have any skills but they were strong. They called each other brothers and said that they were the 12 cave masters. When Xiexing said this, his expression was very calm and his eyes were very focused. Li Yunxin was looking at his expression, and he was also looking at Li Yunxin's expression. Both of them had a tacit understanding. They both knew that these words might be false, but neither of them said it. For the two schemers, any kind of open and honest action would seem childish. At least at this moment they were like two skilled gladiators, holding a sword and a shield, carefully circling and testing each other. No one would really fight. He didn't know what Xiexing was thinking. But Li Yunxin enjoyed this feeling, this thrilling thrill of having everything under control. But who didn't? I stayed there for a whole month. Without water they could only lick the dew on the stone walls and drink the rainwater. If there's nothing to eat, we'll eat the wild fruits on the cliff first. If we're lucky, we'll be able to catch some small beasts. But even so, after a month, they'll be on the verge of death. Li Yunxin frowned. Why don't you go out? Xie Xing laughed. Go out? The wolf demon had forgotten about me. I used to try to cross that path at night, thinking of going outside. In the end, he discovered that there were already more than 10 demons gathered in the lair, and they did not leave day and night. I have also seen them eat human flesh and say that they are not full. They had indeed left me there. If I go out from there, I'll probably be eaten halfway. Li Yunxin frowned. It's indeed difficult. Then what will you do? Regardless of Li Yunxin's position and identity, it was undeniable that it was hard to dislike a person with such a pleasing appearance and ability to read people's minds when he intentionally did so. And now, even if he was willing to cooperate, no matter how vigilant and picky Xie Xing was, he had to admit that he was a very good listener. Xie Xing listened to his words and smiled again. Then I had a fortuitous encounter. Li Yunxin's eyes widened and he asked at the right time, what fortuitous encounter? He knew Xie Xing's state. Xie Xing. No matter where he came from, he was now a human. Since he was a human, his physiological structure determined his emotions and preferences, roughly within a certain range. For example, no matter how sloppy a normal person was, they would not like to eat shit. This meant that even if Xie Xing was scheming and sinister, there was a range to follow. Even if it was Li Yunxin himself, a monster without emotions in his previous life. In this life he had a normal body. Didn't his emotions and will gradually change? Matter and will could never be discussed separately. Therefore, certain emotions were inevitable. For example, coming to a strange world alone. Going through many trials and tribulations. Even through all kinds of fortuitous encounters, he fought for a space for himself. And when he did these things, no one knew and there was no one like him to talk to. Now that he finally met a decent person, the desire to talk was inevitable. Xie Xing might be extremely cautious. But in his previous life, Li Yunxin had met people who were more difficult to deal with. Therefore, Xie Xing spoke a little more, even he himself did not realize it. I was on the verge of death at that time. I knew that if I stayed here there would be no change. No one would come to save me in a short time and I might starve to death. So I drank all the water I had saved, ate some food and decided to climb down the cliff. Li Yunxin nodded. In fact, he should have done this long ago. However, Xie Xing knew that he still had people like him in this world, and seemed to know that someone would come to find him. Therefore, his will was not as firm as a real desperate survivor. And the result? The result was naturally falling down. Xie Xing sighed softly. Li Yunxin also breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. The other party began to show some subtle emotions. Before it was a smile, now it was a sigh. Revealing emotions meant that the vigilance in the heart was gone. This was a good thing. But I was blocked by the trees on the cliff and didn't fall into the valley. Instead, I fell on a stone platform a dozen meters below the cliff. There used to be grass and trees on this stone platform, so I didn't see it. Even so, it was only a superficial wound. Then I found there was a stone cave behind the stone platform. Li Yunxin clapped his hands lightly. Wonderful. Inside the stone cave, there used to be someone living there. Xie Xing's eyes shone slightly. It seemed that this matter had left a deep impression in his mind. Even now, when he thought about it, he still felt excited, even in this kind of situation. I found a stone bed inside. A chest. When I opened the chest, I found a martial arts manual. It was called the Killing Intent Formula. There was also a letter. It said that there was once a martial arts expert who came here to train in seclusion, and practiced this heart technique. After mastering the heart technique, an enemy came to find him. The enemy poisoned him, then crippled him and left him in the cave to die. Before he died, he wrote down his heart technique and his experience, leaving it to the fated person. And I became the fated person. When Xie Xing said this, he seemed to be in a normal mood. But Li Yunxin was now a great demon, and his keen eyesight was incomparable to that of humans. Therefore he could clearly hear Xie Xing's slightly accelerated heartbeat, see the slightest muscle twitch on his face, and even remember how long it took for him to gasp for breath. Therefore he knew that Xie Xing was not as calm as he looked. This person was extremely excited at the moment. And it was far beyond the extent that he should be. It seemed that what excited him was not only the survival and the treasures left by the predecessors. There were other factors. For example, a certain film and television work in Li Yunxin's world. Androids built a real paradise. Real humans could play in this paradise. Everything they saw was real and fake at the same time. The experience brought by such a world was by no means comparable to any film, television, or game. Li Yunxin knew this feeling very well. In the eyes of a transmigrator, this world was a game world. Now in such a world he personally experienced the things in the story of the past. And it was extremely real, and it was indeed a matter of life and death. This kind of excitement was hard to imagine. Different from Li Yunxin. Xie Xing seemed to know his mission and purpose clearly. And he was isolated from the world for a long time. Therefore, in a sense, although he lived in this world longer than Li Yunxin, in fact he had not fully integrated into this world. Li Yunxin realized that he had grasped a key point. Previously he and Lu Gongzan showed amazing and incredible power in Lord Wolf's cave residence. But from beginning to end, Xie Xing, as a mortal, did not feel fear or panic. He was calm and composed. Even if he was sitting opposite to Li Yunxin at the moment, he did not feel the slightest sense of awkwardness. This meant that he despised the power that Li Yunxin and Lu Gongzan had, even if he didn't have it yet. Li Yunxin understood this feeling too well. In the past, he also despised the power of the cultivators of Shenmen for the same reason and despised the power of the emperor in the secular world. This was almost the contempt of a member of a higher civilization for a lower civilization, just like a modern urbanite despising the chief of a primitive tribe. Arrogance was a good thing. Li Yunxin realized that he had found the entry point. So he let out a sigh of relief. And then I mastered it. It only took me 3 days. Xie Xing shook his head slightly. But that person said he had been meditating for 10 years. The killing intent technique is indeed amazing. I mastered this thing. Although it can't be said that I have infinite strength, it's not a problem to fight a tiger with my bare hands. So I went down the cliff. Relying on my martial arts, I walked in all directions for more than 10 days. But I couldn't get out. This mountain area is too big. I don't know where I am now. Li Yunxin nodded. I can understand. I met that Lord Wolf. Xie Xing was silent for a while as if he was quite emotional. That Lord Wolf and the 12 cave masters had a conflict. His cultivation was higher, so he destroyed their cultivation and beat them back to their original forms. I have martial arts. I lied and said that I was also a monster. Then Lord Wolf asked me if I was a ghost cultivator. Only then did I know there was such a thing. The cultivation of the monsters here is not high. After becoming a human they just have a bit more strength. I relied on my martial arts to not reveal any flaws. Since I couldn't get out, it's not bad to temporarily rely on that Lord Wolf to have a place to stay. In the next few years I stayed in the cave with the monsters. Xie Xing looked at Li Yunxin. Wait. Li Yunxin smiled. That Lord Wolf is really pitiful, but Xie Xing snorted. Rotten wood can't be carved. But there is no other way. There are many monsters smarter than him, but most of them are very cruel. Only he, as a monster, is not too bad. I trained him for a few years and that's what you see now. I kept telling him that I saw the ruins of an ancient immortal. There was a prophecy saying that a certain monster would become the ruler of the world. Then I forged some things for him to see. He believed it. Li Yunxin thought for a while, wanting to say something but hesitated. Xie Xing raised his eyebrows. Not only did his emotions become rich, even his expression became lively. In the cave, the things you saw him do, didn't I teach him? That's why I said it's rotten wood. I taught him to be low-key and endure, and taught him to pay attention to details. The 2 words he said when he first met you were taught by me. I taught him for many years. He finally knows how to use them. But after that, the 3 visits to the thatched cottage, that was really stupid. It was all his own idea. He learned something from me, so he took it out and used it, but he couldn't use it well. Li Yunxin waved his hand. But why did you run away later? At that time did you think I was... The look on Xie Xing's face suddenly disappeared. He calmed down again. After looking at Li Yunxin for a while he said, I also want to run away now. But I can't. At that time I didn't know who you were. But now, I still have doubts. Let me ask you a question. Even Li Yunxin, who had calmed down a lot at this moment, was still a little nervous after hearing this sentence. What he was most afraid of had come. The question from Xie Xing's mouth must be extremely difficult. If he was not careful, the limited trust he had now would disappear. In that case he had to treat Xie Xing as a disposable object, to seize his memory and then kill him. In fact, there were several ways to get the best of both worlds, to get the things in his mind and to make him be controlled by him. However, the most reassuring thing was a dead person. This matter was related to his life, so he must not be careless. Once Mu Nanju found this true crown prince, how would they deal with him who knew too much information? Li Yunxin did not want to think about such a situation. So he said in a low voice, "Ask." At the same time he spread out his perception. Once again he carefully checked every suspicious place to prevent himself from falling into Xie Sheng's trap like what happened in the valley. Xie Sheng thought for a while and said, "This world's Little Demon Protection. Little Demon Protection Association. Is it one of us?" Li Yunxin was stunned. Xie Sheng keenly noticed his reaction. He smiled, "Forget it. I will ask in another way, the master of the Little Demon Protection. That way River Lord, is he one of us?" Li Yunxin was stunned for a while again. Then he said, Maybe. Xie Sheng narrowed his eyes. He carefully examined him. Finally he sighed, "My guess is right. You don't know the core secret. In the Little Demon Protection, you are considered a high-level peripheral figure, right?" Li Yunxin finally regained his senses. He frowned slightly and said in a low voice, "I know far more than you think." Xie Sheng laughed softly, "Including the Ascended?" Li Yunxin's expression froze on her face again. Xie Sheng seemed to have gotten the information he wanted and gradually lost interest. "All right. Let's stop here. Now, do you have the Tao of this world?" Chapter 581. Li Yunxin paused for a while. Then he frowned, "What are you talking about?" But his heart was already filled with joy. The first 2 times he was in a daze were sincere. Now this time, he finally understood why Xie Sheng would ask this question. Lord Wei River, who created the Little Demon Protection, was a mystery to Xie Sheng, who lived in the forest and had limited information. However, smart people would always be able to see the outline of the overall situation from limited information. As the saying goes, by seeing one spot, one could know the whole picture. If Li Yunxin was in Xie Sheng's position, the name Little Demon Protection would attract his attention first. Little Demon Protection Association. This was not a name that people in this world would come up with. And the leader of the Little Demon Protection, Lord Wei River, destroyed the forces of Daotong and demons at the same time. Its origin was also mysterious. To a transmigrator like Xie Sheng, it was as if this thing was standing on the top of a mountain holding a torch and shouting to him, "The organization is here, come find us." This smart person, with a very reasonable and brilliant deduction, regarded the Little Demon Protection as the organization he belonged to. He still didn't know about the existence of Mu Nanju. Li Yunxin's previous worries and painstakingly searched for an entry point. Now this smart person suddenly delivered himself to his door. So, smart people were really the most adorable creatures in this world. Especially those who thought themselves to be smart. Li Yunxin's previous reaction wasn't fake at all. Even he himself couldn't see any flaws. Seeing his current appearance, Xie Sheng smiled again. "I said Taoist arts. Since I can use 3 days to learn that killing intent incantation, Taoist art should also be very fast. I couldn't find it before, now you should have it. Give it to me first so I can protect myself on the road." This was a brilliant plot. It was exactly the same as what Li Yunxin had done. If this Li Yunxin was one of us, of course he would gladly agree. If he wasn't one of us but wanted to gain his trust, he would be even more generous. Li Yunxin's reaction was also within his expectations. "You are still immortal." Li Yunxin pretended to be hesitant. "I naturally have Tao techniques and I can give them to you. But you have just recovered from a serious injury. Cultivating Tao techniques at this time. Something goes wrong." Xie Sheng calmly said, "When I was cultivating the killing intent arts, I didn't know anything compared to now. Do not judge me by the standards of your world. Give it to me." Li Yunxin sighed and put his hand into his sleeve. After searching for a while he took out a scroll. "This is the Golden Light technique. It's a type of Kenzo sword technique." After saying these 2 sentences, he didn't say anything else and directly threw the Taoist book to him. Li Yunxin had taken this along with the Cloud Mountain when she plundered it. The various techniques of Daotong and Kenzo, even if they were unimportant and low-level techniques, would always have a backup. Thus Li Yunxin caught them all in one fell swoop. The scroll he threw to Xie Sheng was actually not a third-rate one. When the people of the 5 Gene Sword sect built their foundations and reached the Emptiness Realm, they would first cultivate this scroll. Now, it was like throwing a junior high textbook to a child who just graduated from kindergarten. It just depended on whether his abilities were as great as his arrogance. Xie Sheng took it. He didn't put it away. Instead, he immediately opened it and looked at it with the light of the fire. It seemed that he had already wasted too much time in this mountain, so he didn't want to waste any time from now on. Thus, in this completely silent mountain, Xie Sheng read for almost an hour. This was a very long time. But it was bearable for the two. During this time, Xie Xing was silent most of the time. Occasionally he would ask Li Yunxin a few questions. He was a little surprised by these questions. Because the questions were all critical, and the questions were even more profound than what Li Yunxin had imagined. This meant that Xie Xing had an amazing understanding of Dao techniques. It was even possible that he was even better than Li Yunxin. This made him feel uncomfortable. How could such a person exist? He didn't believe it. But in the end, Xie Xing put down the scroll. He closed his eyes, sat cross-legged on the ground, and adjusted his breathing for a while, as if he was comprehending. Then he picked up the scroll and read it again as if he was trying to verify a few key points. About a quarter of an hour later, he raised his hand and threw the scroll into the fire. Li Yunxin frowned. He saw that Xie Xing had already entered meditation. Then, he began to feel a slight fluctuation. The surrounding spiritual energy began to gather in Xie Xing's body. This time he was really shocked and he almost jumped up. A warrior. He had never come into contact with Dao techniques. After reading the Dao scripture for more than an hour, he entered meditation and he even sensed this world. If Li Yunxin hadn't disturbed the spiritual energy in the world, causing the spiritual energy in this place to become chaotic and thin, this Xie Xing would have successfully built his foundation and stepped into the intent realm tonight. This was really King strange. How could there be such a person? It only took him half an hour more than when he successfully built his foundation and stepped into the intent realm. But the spiritual energy in this place couldn't be compared to before. In the past, the spiritual energy in this world was like a calm ocean. As long as one had the tools, the right cultivation method, they could obtain water from this ocean. But now the ocean had become turbulent. Although one could absorb some spiritual energy, the spiritual energy conflicted with each other, and it wasn't as easy to obtain as before. Xie Xing's body sensed the world. But if one were to describe it vividly, it would be like the messy spiritual energy was rushing into his body, entangling with each other and blocking his way, making it impossible for anyone to enter. If he wanted to truly build his foundation and step into the cultivation world, he had to find a paradise with the same stable spiritual energy as before. About a quarter of an hour later, Xie Xing exclaimed softly and opened his eyes. Li Yunxin immediately retracted the gloating smile on his face and solemnly frowned. You can't be impatient about this. Spending 15 minutes in meditation is already an extraordinary achievement. There are very few people in this world who can compare to you. Xie Xing thought for a while. Very few people? Is there anyone who's faster than me? Yes. Li Yunxin smiled. I heard that there's a mysterious peerless master who entered meditation half an hour faster than you during his first time. Alas, it'll be a blessing if I can meet someone like that. Xie Xing also smiled. That's impossible. It's just a legend. Li Yunxin gave a non-committal, oh. He found this guy more and more annoying, because he was too like himself. Xie Xing stood up, brushed the snow off his body and said casually, let's go. Take me to Qinzhou. Hearing this, Li Yunxin was silent for a while. Then he said calmly, you won't be able to see him. After saying this he paused. But Xie Xing only frowned slightly and didn't reply. So he said the second half of the sentence. Qinzhou is already dead. Xie Xing's face was filled with undisguised shock. Even though it was only for a short moment. Then the destined one looked at Li Yunxin suspiciously. Are you kidding me? Isn't she already a few thousand years old? Li Yunxin's mind raced. Xie Xing clearly knew Qinzhou. The phrase has lived for thousands of years revealed two pieces of information. First, since it was already, it meant that Qinzhou hadn't existed in the past. Qinzhou was indeed a transmigrator. Therefore, the vague information about her cultivation and attainment of Taoism became more credible. She used to be a mortal. Second, before Xie Xing came here, or for some purpose received some information or used some method, it was no earlier than 2,000 years ago. If it was earlier he wouldn't know that Qinzhou had attained enlightenment and had a long lifespan. But it wouldn't be later than 1,000 years ago. Because at that time, the art saint had already been killed by the saints. Xie Xing really didn't know anything else. This meant that it had been about 1,000 years since he received the information and came here. Then, Li Yunxin realized an unbelievable situation. The people of Southern Wood House, the art saint's remnant, thought he was the true prince. It was clear that everything was going according to plan on their end. Otherwise, they wouldn't have found someone after 1,000 years and thought they had found the right person at the beginning. To Xie Xing he was 1,000 years late. No matter how he got the news that he was coming to this world, Art Saint Qin Zhao wasn't dead yet. This meant that the flow of time wasn't equal. Li Yunxin didn't know what this meant. However, he felt that this point must be extremely important, and it brought him a great shock. Thus, when Xiexing asked him, "How did Qin Zhao die?" he subconsciously answered, "He was killed by the other two saints of Cloud Mountain." Xiexing sighed and didn't say anything else. He seemed to have suffered a huge blow. A little while passed, each with his own thoughts, and at last the moon peeped out. Xiexing said, "So who's in charge now? I want to see that person." Li Yunxin said in a low voice, "We're in a bad situation right now." Here he paused. Originally, as the high-level member who wasn't a core member of the Demon Protection Group, he should have felt regret when he said this. But there was an unconcealable smugness on his face. It was as if he wasn't a member of the Demon Protection Group. "They've been suppressing us a lot. You made the right decision to hide here. If you didn't hold back and showed yourself outside, you probably wouldn't be standing here safely now. Their spies are everywhere outside." Li Yunxin spoke to Xiexing with the firelight. His voice was low and rhythmic. "When we walk outside, even with me around, it's best to be careful. Anyone can be their spy. Otherwise they wouldn't be relying on the demons now." Xiexing frowned slightly. He seemed to be a little confused and a little lost. Li Yunxin started to show his unknown ability. But he had no choice. When he first met Xiexing, he wanted to get some key information from him. So he was careful and didn't give himself away, planning to gain Xiexing's trust. But he gradually realized that Xiexing was also a ruthless and vigilant person. So he settled for the next best thing, which was to gain a limited trust. He succeeded. Xiexing mistook him as a high-level member of the Demon Protection Group who didn't know too many core secrets. By now, Xiexing's vigilance had slowly weakened. Even his tone and expression became lively. But he still didn't dare to act rashly. He had met some people in his previous life. Maybe they didn't have his ability, but their anti-detection and anti-hypnosis abilities were extremely strong. From the information he obtained from the conversation with Xiexing, he realized that Xiexing had a very strong purpose for coming here. And he was a rational, cautious, and cold person. He wasn't a good person in the past. He was more like a professional fighter. This kind of person was very likely to be a ruthless person who couldn't be moved. So he still didn't move. Until he said what he just said. When talking about Qin Zhao, he casually said, "He was killed by the saints." This sentence seemed to have hit a minefield. Li Yunxin keenly noticed that Xiexing's expression had changed for a moment. He was suspicious again. And this time, his suspicions were strong and turbulent. It might even overturn Xiexing's previous judgment of Li Yunxin's identity. At this point, the bad news was that his trust in Li Yunxin was almost gone. The good news was, it might be hard to imagine, but his vigilance was even lower. This was a little trick that Li Yunxin often played with people in the past. But now, Xiexing had trapped himself in it. At first, he didn't trust him and was extremely vigilant. He automatically set Li Yunxin as an enemy. Then he gave him a limited trust, still trying to find any clues to confirm his guess. Was this Li Yunxin an enemy or a friend? At this point, his emotional inclination was no longer neutral. He was more inclined to find evidence to prove that he was an enemy and not a friend. So, Li Yunxin accidentally gave him the evidence. The idea that he was an enemy and not a friend eventually overwhelmed everything. At this point, when a person's certain thoughts and inclinations were too strong, objectivity would also abandon him. He started to accept some things more easily, but it was harder to accept others. For example, now, if Li Yunxin had said something like, "The outside world is very dangerous and the enemy is very powerful," when they first met, Xiexing would most likely be suspicious. At this point, it would be extremely easy for him to accept such words. This was because his rationality and emotions were almost all focused on the matter of the enemy at this moment. Li Yunxin wanted him to believe this, to believe that the outside world was full of danger and that he shouldn't trust anyone, and strengthen this belief. Because, since he had already lost his trust, then he would use him to do something else. Xiexing was not the only person he was looking for on this trip. After saying this, Li Yunxin fell silent. Xiexing's confusion meant that his hint had some effect. But he didn't dare to be too hasty. Things had to be done slowly. To deal with this Xiexing, he had to be more cautious than dealing with anyone else. After a short period of silence, he said, "So it will be very difficult for you to meet the manager. We have to think about this matter at length. I'll take you to the north first. We have a..." He seemed to think a little hard, then said, "A safe house." Xiexing nodded, "Okay. Then let's rest for the night." After saying this, he hit the ground with his palm. The snow was immediately pushed away by the wind from his palm, revealing the withered grass underneath. It seemed that the killing intent formula he practiced was indeed a good thing. In the world of mortals, it should be a kind of divine skill. No wonder he could rely on this skill to mix with the demons. Then Xiexing lay down on the weeds and pretended to rest. But as soon as his arm touched the ground, he made a soft hiss sound. Li Yunxin immediately asked with concern, "What's wrong?" Xiexing frowned and slowly lay down, then let out a long breath. "My injury hasn't healed yet. Do you still have the healing thing you gave me before?" Li Yunxin smiled. "It's not really a good thing." "Of course I do." He took out a bottle from his sleeve and threw it to him. Xiexing took it and drank it without hesitation. Then he held the jade bottle in his hand and let out a long breath. Slowly he fell asleep. His breathing quickly became long and slow, just like a person who had truly fallen asleep. But Li Yunxin knew that he wasn't sleeping. He was meditating again. Before he obtained the Dao technique, he drank the thing Li Yunxin gave him, so he must have experienced a different feeling. Because the martial arts and inner strength in Jianghu were actually imitations of cultivation methods by mortals. It could be considered as a kindergarten version of cultivation methods. As a powerful martial artist, of course he had experienced it. After comprehending the Dao technique, he should have realized that the thing he drank before was very beneficial to cultivation. So he found an excuse to get another bottle from Li Yunxin. Now that he drank it, he wouldn't waste any time. He used 3 breaths to meditate and began to absorb the spiritual power in the medicine into his body, intending to officially step into the door of cultivation. Xiexing was indeed very courageous and capable in doing things. If it wasn't for his identity, Li Yunxin actually felt that this person could become one of his most capable arms. Then quietly and softly he walked away. After walking for about a dozen steps, the shadows of the trees blocked the light. He could only see the red light between the trees. At this distance, ordinary people wouldn't be able to hear the quiet whispers. But Li Yunxin knew that this Xiexing could. He could sense that Xiexing's martial arts cultivation was roughly the same as Ying Juren's, or maybe even higher. According to Ying Juren's classification of martial artists in Jianghu, he should be a top second-rate master. If he used his inner strength, he should be able to hear the voices of people here. At least Ying Juren could. Li Yunxin said in a low voice, "Old Lu." Lu Gongzan quickly appeared from the shadows. His eyebrows and beard were covered in snow. Who knew what he was doing? "Let's go." Li Yunxin said, "He just tricked me into giving him the medicine, so he's regulating his breathing. Let's take advantage of this time to go back. Let's see if we can find anything else." Lu Gongzan frowned. "I'll stay here and watch him." Li Yunxin shook his head. "No need. The cave is 2 miles away from here. I can sense any movement within 3 miles. I'll know when he wakes up. He hasn't suspected us yet. Let's go." When he said this, he blinked his eyes hard. Lu Gongzan understood. "Okay. Let's go and come back quickly." Chapter 582. So the two of them disappeared into the forest. But Xiexing was still lying motionlessly on the grass with his eyes closed. After a quarter of an hour, he slowly exhaled and opened his eyes. This breath was like a sharp arrow that became a white line in the cold night. He succeeded in building his foundation. He had already crossed the threshold between a mortal and a cultivator. But he still didn't get up. He was experiencing the feeling of the spiritual energy in his body and understanding the other things in the golden light technique. He was practicing Dharma, and those things were techniques. The golden light escape technique. If a mortal without any foundation came to practice this technique, it would probably take a long time. No matter how talented a person is, when faced with something completely unfamiliar, he or Li Yunxin was no exception. But the killing intent technique he practiced before could barely be considered as having a foundation. The spiritual energy of Dharma needed to circulate, and so did the internal energy of Shingon. But now that he had successfully built his foundation, his body was still slowly forming a snow mountain in Qi. Every trace of spiritual energy in the medicinal liquid that was poured into his mouth was used to reconstruct and refine his body. And he wasn't unfamiliar with this process. Martial artists also practiced martial arts like this. Therefore, when comprehending techniques, it was like practicing martial arts and then comprehending fist techniques or saber techniques. There was always a common principle. So after another quarter of an hour, Xiexing thought that he could already use the golden light escape technique. So he decided to escape. That self-proclaimed. Xiexing was stunned when he thought of this. He felt that he should know that guy's name. Old Ghost had talked about that guy's past more than once. Even today he had called him Little Gongzi. But damn it, he couldn't remember that guy's name for a while. He frowned. Just as he was about to think about it, his consciousness suddenly slipped, as if he was holding a piece of slippery soap in his hand. When he exerted some force, it fell to the ground. As long as he focused his attention on that guy's name, he would soon forget what he was focusing his attention on. Forget it? That guy's name isn't important anyway. Xie Xing relaxed his brows and decided to call that guy a pretty boy. That gigolo was an imposter. Xie Xing was only sure about this when he said that Qin Zhao was killed by a saint. It was true that Qin Zhao had died to a so-called saint. But it was only once. It was highly likely that he was just a tool for that group of people in the sky. He had something that those people in the sky wanted. Actually, it wasn't a bad idea to leave it to them, but he had to see how Qin Zhao was doing right now. He was not inflexible, but he had his principles. That Sergeant Lao Dao was quite capable. That pretty boy seemed to be more capable than Sergeant Lao Dao. It was just that they definitely did not expect that they could cultivate their Dao technique so quickly. However, if he didn't have this ability, he wouldn't have come here. Xie Xing tried to spread out his perception. Soon he experienced the feeling of being powerful, as if he could control everything, even though he was only at the concept level. The feeling of cultivation was too wonderful. If he wanted to, he could clearly hear the sounds of twigs snapping and small animals moving within a radius of 1 mile. If he narrowed the range a little, he could even hear the sound of snow falling. From this, he concluded that the pretty boy and Sergeant Lao Dao were not within 1 mile. Thus he slowly stood up. He stood where he was and stared at the flames that the pretty boy had released for a while. Suddenly, he took a step and ran toward the west. Lord Wolf's cave was in the southeast. Now he chose the opposite direction. This was the fastest way to get rid of those two guys. When he took the first step, he left a deep footprint in the snow. But when he took the second step, the footprint was already very shallow. When he took the third step, he left no trace on the snow. When he took the fourth step, his entire body turned into a ball of golden light. There was a buzzing sound in the bushes. The next moment, Xie Xing had already disappeared without a trace. Li Yunxin and Lu Gongzan watched Xie Xing leave in the forest and sighed softly. At least this guy had fallen into the trap. But it wasn't time to let his guard down. Xie Xing couldn't sense their presence because the difference in realm between Li Yunxin and him was too great. Along the way from Yi country to this place, Li Yunxin said that he wanted to be an ordinary person. Lu Gongzan thought that he was fooling around. In fact, part of it was true. He had been away from the human world for too long. Perhaps those cultivators and demons who had slowly gotten used to it didn't matter. But for someone like him who was still alive a year ago and loved the prosperity of the world, that kind of life was too hard to bear. Killing and fighting. For a long time, there were only these two things in his life. Therefore, now that it had come to an end, it could be considered as giving himself a vacation. The clothes, food, shelter, and transportation of the human world were actually very beautiful things. Therefore, he had been on a sightseeing tour along the way, walking like a human. But it was also so that he could conceal himself better. For example, now, Xie Xing couldn't tell the depth of his realm. He only regarded him as a guy who was slightly better than Lu Gongzan. The reason why he made this mistake was that Xie Xing didn't know much about this world. It was also hard to imagine that this pretty boy was actually in the profound realm. After he learned more information, he wouldn't give Li Yunxin another chance. Therefore, this time was probably the only chance he had to fool around with Xie Xing. He wanted to use him to lure someone out. Standing in the snow, Li Yunxin was silent for a while. Then he sighed in a low voice. "Let's go. Follow him from afar." He told his plan to Lu Gongzan. Therefore, Lao Dao knew that he planned to use Xie Xing to lure out another person. But who that person was, Li Yunxin refused to say. He didn't ask. As he always did, he followed behind him loyally and silently. It was Xie Xing's first time using the golden light escape art. At first, he wasn't familiar with it, but after running for a quarter of an hour, he was able to use it smoothly. Like a shooting star in the dense forest, he ran for nearly an hour in one breath before stopping to take a break. By this time he had already run 3 miles. Even if it was 30 li, it would still be enough. If it weren't for the rugged terrain in this mountain, he might have already run for more than 100 miles. But Xie Xing had just stepped into the door of the cultivation world. Moreover, he had taken the last bus. If it was before, when the spiritual chi of heaven and earth hadn't been so chaotic, he would have been able to use this ability more smoothly, and he would have been able to practice other magic faster. But now, he had to rely almost entirely on the spiritual energy brought by the medicinal liquid in his body to use Taoist magic. His realm was still low, and he couldn't filter out useful spiritual energy from the chaotic spiritual qi of heaven and earth like many high-level cultivators. What was happening to him now was very similar to what was described in a novel in Li Yunxin's previous world. A civilization locked down another civilization's technology by changing the way they could observe the macroscopic and microscopic universe. Now, Li Yunxin had done something similar. Many Taoist magic was created when the spiritual qi of heaven and earth was stable. Now that it was chaotic, it couldn't be cultivated. And according to the situation in the real world, even the theory might be wrong. Lu Gongzan understood this, Li Yunxin understood this, but Xiexing didn't. Therefore, when he saw Xiexing sitting cross-legged on a green stone, trying to absorb the spiritual qi of heaven and earth through meditation, Li Yunxin laughed. "It's a waste of effort." He shrugged. "That's why I said that planning ahead is one of the greatest virtues in the world. I'm afraid that this real guy is also a genius. That's why he spent so much effort to make the spiritual qi of heaven and earth like this. Even if he was a genius, he wouldn't be able to cultivate. Now look at him, I'm so happy." After thinking for a while, he couldn't help but laugh. "I'm happy. Continue to be happy, Lao Dao looked at him worriedly. He felt that there was something wrong with Brother Xian at the moment. As for what was wrong, he couldn't tell. He just felt that there was something wrong with his emotions. But according to the theory that Li Yunxin had told him before, once you had an intuition that something might be like this, then maybe it was because your subconscious had noticed many small details that your subjective consciousness didn't pay attention to. That was why you had this feeling. And now Lu Gongzan felt that. Li Yunxin's joy seemed to be concealing something in his heart. Was it nervousness or worry? He tried to look at the expression on Brother Xian's face inadvertently, but he didn't find anything. He tried to look at Xiexing in the distant mountains. Then a thought suddenly jumped out. The direction that Xiexing was going was the direction of Brother Xian's former hometown. Previously, when Brother Xian talked to Xiexing, he told him that they should go north. So if Xiexing wanted to escape, he definitely wouldn't choose the north. Then when they talked, they deliberately let Xiexing hear that they were going to Lord Wolf's cave. And Lord Wolf's cave was in the southeast. Therefore east, south, and north were not good choices for Xiexing. He had to go west. This was Brother Xian's usual method. When you talked to him, you didn't notice anything unusual. Then you made a decision and felt that it was your true thought. But in fact, you didn't know. He was the one who told you to think so. That was the scary part. Brother Xian drove Xiexing to the west, to his hometown. Who was he trying to lure out? As this thought came to mind, Lu Gongzan immediately remembered more things along the way. Along the way, Li Yunxin looked carefree and relaxed, but he was actually very cautious. He used to think that Brother Xian was such a person. You looked at him and thought he was carefree and carefree. But in fact, when he was smiling, he was thinking more than anyone else. Now, when he carefully recalled what had happened in the past few days, he realized that Li Yunxin had done many things along the way. He had been carefully on guard. He left some tracks along the way and erased others. The ones he left behind seemed to be to let others find him. The reason why he was erased was so that others would only know his approximate location, but would not be able to pinpoint his exact location. For example, in the previous hour they had been tracking Xiexing. In fact, with their current cultivation and treasures, even if they were walking close to Xiexing's back and chatting and laughing, they had ways to make him not notice them. But Li Yunxin was watching from afar. This meant he wasn't guarding against Xiexing. It was someone else. From the moment they left Tongtian Swamp, they had already been working on this matter. Lu Gongzan was shocked by this belated discovery. But he also knew that his thoughts were not as many as Li Yunxin's. Many things were only realized when he was halfway done or finished. And Li Yunxin might have sensed his worries or he might not have. His gaze was always focused on Xiexing. Occasionally he would look around. After about a quarter of an hour, Xiexing opened his eyes and stood up from the green stone. His expression was a little puzzled and unwilling. Obviously, he didn't understand why he couldn't get more spiritual power from the world, and there were a few spells he couldn't understand. Maybe he thought that Li Yunxin had done something to this scroll. So he gave up after trying a few times, afraid that he would be tricked. After a little hesitation, he continued to fly west. Because there was some fear in his heart. Some unknown, vague fear, but it was enough to affect his decision. This fear was planted when he talked with Li Yunxin just now. Now it was like a poisonous flower slowly blooming in his heart. This world was dangerous. He lived in danger and fear. He had to carefully keep a distance from everyone until, he didn't know when. So another 4 hours passed. For cultivators, it wasn't difficult to travel for 4 hours. But Xiesheng was still immortal before tonight. At last he was weary after such a long journey, and he was indeed walking westward. But most of the time he was going around in circles, going in circles. This wasn't because he couldn't recognize the road, but because he encountered Li Yunxin hitting the wall. Finally, Xiesheng climbed over a ridge and saw signs of human habitation. A small village with a dozen or so families scattered in the valley. There were no lights at this time. He knew this place. This was the village that Old Ghost used to live in, and it was also the village that the pretty boy used to live in. It turned out that he had only walked this far after going around in the mountains for more than 4 hours. This made him anxious. But more than that, he was vigilant from the bottom of his heart when he saw this village. He had been in the mountains for many years, how could he not know the way? Someone was playing tricks. The first thing he thought of was that the pretty boy was following him. Once this idea came to his mind, he immediately crouched down and hid behind a tree. Then he planned to slowly retreat into the forest behind him. But just after 3 steps he suddenly tripped over something. He looked down, it was a few broken bricks. So he immediately knew where this was. The former residence of the pretty boy. After Old Ghost mentioned Lei Bao, he and Lord Wolf both came here to take a look. What they saw was the ruins that had been completely demolished. The only thing that was considered intact was a circle of broken bricks. Damn it, he didn't even know when he came to this place. He became more vigilant. At this time he suddenly heard a low male voice. Don't move. There is a restriction set up by the Freemasons. You have now walked into the restriction. Chapter 583. A voice came from behind. It wasn't the voice of the pretty boy. Xiesheng's heartstrings tightened. He almost turned around and struck out with his palm. However, he immediately realized that no matter who it was, to be able to silently appear behind him while he was concentrating, it wasn't the best choice to act rashly when facing such an enemy. Therefore he took a deep breath, slowly straightened his back and slowly turned around. The newcomer was just behind him, only 1 step away from him. The newcomer was wearing black clothes and a cloak. The night was dark and only the lower half of his face could be seen, hidden in the shadow of the cloak's hood. The strange thing was, the outline of the lower half of the face was somewhat familiar, even though there was a soft black beard on his lips and chin. The newcomer seemed to be a middle-aged man. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, giving off a calm aura. Seeing that Xiesheng had turned around, the newcomer took a small step back, as if to not make Xiesheng more nervous. I'm the one who will guide you. You can trust me. Now do as I say. Circulate the spiritual energy in your body for a small cycle. Guard the upper and lower apertures. As he spoke, he stretched out his hand towards Xiesheng. Xiesheng didn't have any room to dodge. The newcomer's cultivation level was obviously much higher than his. Perhaps it was this guy who led him here. No. Or it was that pretty boy's new plan. A sense of uneasiness rose in Xiesheng's heart. This made him feel strange. On one hand, his intuition told him that the person in front of him might be the real guide. But on the other hand, a subconscious thought told him, don't trust anyone. This world is extremely dangerous. However, the newcomer had already placed his hand on his pulse. Then, a vigorous spiritual energy rushed into his body and flowed into his meridians. I see that you already know some ways of cultivation. But you've just started. If you want to walk out of this restriction without alarming it, you have to use some small tricks. You can't do it with your current realm. The newcomer's voice was deep, but it didn't make people feel disgusted. It even had a unique attraction. Now, I'll give you some spiritual energy to help you form the ocean of Qi and mountain of snow and step into the emptiness realm. As soon as he finished speaking, more spiritual energy rushed into Xiesheng's body. Mortals could not experience such a feeling, the influx of power. In an instant, Xiesheng felt that his body was filled with some kind of surging Qi, and the pleasure it brought was no less than when he had just stepped into the cultivation world. There was almost no need for him to consciously control anything. His newly formed ocean of Qi and mountain of snow began to operate, greedily absorbing the newly obtained spiritual power into it, making it more stable and substantial. Just like that, it only took a short 3 breaths of time. A strong and abundant power suddenly spread out from the ocean of Qi and mountain of snow and violently swept through his meridians, acupoints, muscles, bones, skin, and flesh like a shock wave. Xiesheng couldn't tell if it was a pleasant or painful experience. His eyes widened and he almost shook off the hand of the person who came. But she heard him say again, "Sure enough." Although Teng Qingshan had not truly stepped into the emptiness realm, he had already touched the threshold. "Your cultivation speed is the second fastest I've ever seen in my life. It really is you." But now Xiexing's body was being battered by spiritual energy that was like waves. His meridians, muscles, and bones all changed in a short period of time. He became stronger and purer than an ordinary person. He no longer had any spare thoughts to listen to the words of the person who came. In fact, from the moment he turned around until now, only a short period of 10 seconds had passed. But now he felt as if an entire year had passed. It was as if a new world had been created in his body, and every minute experience had been magnified infinitely. After another 2 breaths of time, the person finally let go of Xiexing's hand. At this moment, Xiexing seemed to have been fished out of the water. In this cold night of early winter, his clothes were soaked with sweat. White mist rose from the top of his head and shoulders, and his face was rosy as if he had just been roasted by fire. However, his body stank incomparably. It was the smell that was forced out of his body by the spiritual energy. Now, he had been forcefully pushed to the pinnacle of the intent realm by the person who came. He was only a little bit away from the emptiness realm. And the person who came seemed to be indifferent to the smell on his body. He said in a deep voice, "Right now the intention is to guard the central palace. Empty the foot of Shaoyang and come out." Xiexing could only understand a few of the words that the person used. However, he had previously practiced the Dao technique that Li Yunxin had given him. Now he could infer many things from one example and understand what was going on. Hearing that the person's tone was very serious, he didn't care about it for now. He did as the person said and channeled his qi. Suddenly, his body appeared in the forest 1 zhang away. The person shook his head slightly. It was as if he was secretly exclaiming, "Sure enough, you learn fast." Then he turned around and looked at Xiexing. "You made me look for you hard." When he said this, every word seemed to be a sigh. But his tone was still surprisingly calm. Xiexing frowned at him, but his body was still tense, ready to escape at any time. "Did Qining ask you to pick me up?" The person nodded. Sort of. Qining is already dead." Xiexing narrowed his eyes and exhaled softly. "Killed by the saint." The person looked at him and was silent for a while. He didn't answer his question. Instead, he lifted his hand and pulled down his hood. "Just now Li Yunxin found you, right? Whatever I say to you now will probably make you suspicious. So there's no need to test me. I'll take you away now. When the time comes you'll naturally know everything." This seemed to be the most correct way to deal with it. For this person, Xiexing couldn't resist at all. He would take him to a certain place and meet some people. Then everything would naturally be clear. However, at this moment, Xiexing was stunned. The person who had taken off his hood had a very handsome face. Actually, for a middle-aged man, it wasn't appropriate to use the word handsome to describe his appearance. However, it didn't feel wrong to use it to describe this person, even though he had the 5 strands of long beard that were very popular among men in this era. But his appearance, this extremely outstanding appearance, was extremely similar to that pretty boy. At this moment, Xiexing realized that he had fallen into the pretty boy's trap again. He didn't hesitate anymore. He channeled his spiritual qi and chanted the incantation in a low voice, "Ji." His figure immediately turned into a golden light and shot toward the vast forest like a bolt of lightning. In just a moment there was no trace of him. Only 3 deep to shallow footprints were left on the spot. However, this man wasn't in a hurry. Instead, he shook his head helplessly, like an adult watching a naughty child running away. As long as he took 2 steps he could easily catch him back. But at this time, a voice also rang out behind him. "You also made me look for you hard." The newcomer paused. Standing where he was, he didn't turn his head. This continued for a full 3 breaths of time before he heard the person behind him say again, "Aren't you guys dead?" The tone was calm and the voice was clear. It was like he was narrating an insignificant matter. The 2 stood on the snowy ground. The newcomer was silent, his gaze staring straight ahead. But there was no focus in his gaze, as if there was no focus in his thoughts. Behind him, 3 steps away, stood Li Yunxin. He had wrapped himself in a cloak, only revealing his face, as if he was extremely afraid of the cold. However, his gaze was firm and his expression even more unswerving. After another long 3 breaths of time, the newcomer slowly turned around. Li Yunxin stared at him for a while and laughed, but his tone was still calm. It was as if the one laughing and talking were 2 different people. "Is really you Li Chunfeng?" Where's Shangguanyu? Why isn't she here? Li Chunfeng sighed softly. Yun Exen, stop, said Li Yunxin expressionlessly. You can call me Dragon King or Wei River Lord now. If you really want to call me by my name, use my surname as well. My surname was also Li in my previous life. Li Chunfeng's eyes dimmed. It was as if some light had been extinguished, so he sighed again. All right. Today isn't the time to talk. I'll take my leave. Wei River Lord. With these words, he lifted his foot and walked away. With only one step, he appeared dozens of meters away. However, when he took the second step, it was as if the whole space was suddenly pulled back by some force. He was back where he was. You forgot. Standing in the snowy ground, Li Yunxin said, I'm in the profound realm. He looked at Li Chunfeng and repeated his question. Where's Shangguanyu? Li Chunfeng also looked up at him. We'll talk about it later. But right now, Li Yunxin suddenly opened his eyes wide. Right now? Right now what? Li Chunfeng, you can't go anywhere if you don't solve the problem between us. Where's Shangguanyu? When he said the last sentence, his tone was no longer calm. He shouted the question. So Li Chunfeng sighed for the third time. Fine. Let's talk about the problem between us first. You want to know what's going on? Then I'll tell you from the beginning. Do you want to listen? None of you people speak the truth. Li Yunxin smiled disdainfully. What else is there to say? However, he didn't leave. He was still standing in the snowy ground. Li Chunfeng let out a sigh and looked up at the sky. I'm from Munanju. 20 years ago, I had to do one thing. I had to find the translucent jade slip. But at that time, the translucent jade slip was on Cloud Mountain. So you and Shangguanyu sneaked into Cloud Mountain? Li Chunfeng looked at Li Yunxin with a complicated look in his eyes. No, your mother? Li Yunxin snorted and laughed. I was a disciple of the Celestial Gate. But because I have the bloodline of the sage, I can enter and leave Cloud Mountain freely sometimes. Li Chunfeng said slowly and calmly, so my mission was to sneak into Celestial Gate and win her favor. To become her Dao companion and get the translucent jade slip through her. Li Yunxin's disdainful look disappeared. He became expressionless again and looked at Li Chunfeng with a gloomy look. Then I succeeded. I got the translucent jade slip through her. Li Chunfeng was silent for a long time. You want to say that she didn't know? Li Yunxin said slowly. Someone who didn't know would come here from Celestial Gate with you with the translucent jade slip. Then I found out about you. Li Chunfeng interrupted him. I told her everything. After that, we escaped here with the translucent jade slip to live in seclusion. To hide from Daotong Kenzo and Munanju. Li Yunxin opened his mouth. He laughed convulsively but quickly restrained himself. His eyes became fierce as he stared at Li Yunxin. So touching. Are you trying to say that it was all for love, for me, for Shangguanyu? What's going on? Receiving people? He finally took a step forward and approached Li Chunfeng like a beast. The person you are looking for, Xie Xing. He should be the child of you and Shangguanyu, right? I should be him, right? You felt that something was wrong, so you observed me for more than 10 years, pretending to be a loving father, a filial son, and a loving child. Ha! He laughed ferociously. But in the blink of an eye, he restrained himself and stared at Li Chunfeng. It's all an act. This child? He reached out his hand from under the cloak and pointed at himself. He's just a tool. Almost no one. To be able to survive after witnessing Li Yunxin's rage, it was a miracle. But Li Chunfeng was still very calm. He looked at Li Yunxin and said, but in fact, before the two of us escaped, the two fake saints on Cloud Mountain had already seen through my identity. We escaped here and lived a stable life for a while. Then the people of Munanju found me. They told me that the Freemasons also knew that we were here, they just wanted to cast a long line to catch a big fish. So they gave me a choice. Use the child in your mother's belly to make a passage. They can guarantee your mother's safety. After it's done, they will give us freedom. Or die. Li Chunfeng breathed a sigh of relief. The two of them were very close. His breath turned into white mist in the cold night and drifted to Li Yunxin's body, as if clouds and mist were rising from Long Sun's body. I know this is also Munanju's punishment for me, so I chose the latter. But in the past 14 years, he whispered, it may not be all an act. Li Yunxin slowly took a step back. He tilted his head slightly and looked at Li Chunfeng as if he was looking at a stranger. After a while, he suddenly laughed hysterically, disgusting. Disgusting. You know I have a past life. And you still said, ha. Disgusting. But Li Chuanfeng's expression was extremely calm. As if any words could not hurt him. He looked at Li Yunxin, his eyes seemed to be a little sad. Who doesn't have a past life? In this world there is also reincarnation. But Yunxian. He took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. His breath was a little shaky. This life is real. You are my son. Li Yunxin was stunned. For as long as 3 breaths, he suddenly became furious. Without warning, he blasted a palm at Li Chunfeng and roared, "You are only doing this for your own life. Today I will send you on your way." It was indeed a full-strength attack. The full-strength attack of a profound realm great demon. But Li Chunfeng dodged slightly and avoided it. This situation seemed to be beyond Li Yunxin's expectation. He was stunned for a moment, then blasted another palm. But Li Chuanfeng's body had already floated away like the wind. His expression was still calm. The one who went to Cloud Mountain was my incarnation. The master of Munanju wanted me to use my incarnation to do that, then destroy it, sever the love connection and pass the love tribulation. He sighed, but I can't sever it now. Yunxian, your mother doesn't know. The sin is all mine. She is innocent. If you want to see her, Li Chuanfeng's figure slowly disappeared. Li Yunxin angrily blasted a few more palms at him, but none of them hit him. This meant Li Chuanfeng's cultivation was at least no lower than Shi's profound realm. Finally, his figure disappeared. Only 4 words remained, Shi is on Dragon Island. That you're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.